Government in this town is excellent and uses your tax dollars efficiently.
I see it coming. The moment Bitcoin is what they fear it is. Or do we?
What an astounding revolution Bitcoin represents. Bitcoin is...
All right, everybody, welcome to the Great Western Showdown here on the Western Pacific side of Mexico in Acapulco in the great fourth annual Acapulco event that we're at. It's going to be a wonderful debate. So a lot of you guys may remember from last year, we had an excellent debate between Roger Ver and John Dilley, and also Roger Ver and Tone Vase. And it was a lively debate. It was one of the earliest of its kind back then. And there were many more subsequent debates that took place, but we're glad that we got on the front end of that. And it sparked a lot of controversy and a lot of discussion, and that's what we're here for at the Crypto Show. We like to spark, maybe not so much controversy, but discussion. And we're going to try to keep it at a civil level here, and that's not going to be hard to do because we have two civil gentlemen on either side of this debate. We have, of course, Juan Galt and Roger Ver, and we're going to be discussing essentially well, Bitcoin Core versus Bitcoin Cash and the merits or demerits of both relative to each other. Of course, and then we have Jonathan Mohan here sitting with me. He's going to be a neutral moderator here, at least hopefully neutral.
Yes. Well, we had a pretty long conversation a week or two ago about denominationalism and cryptocurrency. And how many Bitcoins should there be? So I would like to be as moderate in the middle as it comes. And
actually, do you want to just briefly summarize that that position you took and why it's relevant to this discussion? This discussion.
So I've been interested in Bitcoin.
And the title, of course.
Oh, sure.
When to fork off the Pope.
Yeah. So yes, listen to that old episode. But no, I really love Bitcoin, and I tell people when they say, "Do you like Bitcoin?" I go, "I'm in the business of killing dragons." And if Bitcoin happens to be Excalibur, I'm all for it. But I'm in the business of killing dragons. And I like any technology that helps me kill a dragon. And one of the things that I like about this discussion about how Bitcoin should or shouldn't evolve is what aspects of it are centralized and what aspects of it are decentralized. And I think that there is a question that people need to understand even before they get to different implementations of Bitcoin, which is that should there only ever be one canonical version of it? Should we actually allow the concept of centralization to apply to the most decentralized thing in the very core of what it even means to be Bitcoin? And for me, I sort of take like an AT&T approach, which is when AT&T got broken up into 20 companies, if you just held AT&T, you would have like made an insane return. And I just think that, as long as every fork of Bitcoin is killing the dragon in a different way or a different part of its body, that's sort of achieving the thing that I want to see.
That's a great analogy, I think, with the AT&T. I like that. And you're right. I mean, some of this boils down to it's not even just Bitcoin Core and Bitcoin Cash. We can
I jump in and ask, when you're talking about killing the dragon, what is the dragon a symbol of? I don't really understand the...
Well, I left it vague for a reason, which is that everyone has a different end state for the framework or the goal of their network. And then as it matures, they realize, actually, we're more interested in this aspect of this framework. Actually, we're more interested in that aspect. And the anachronism or the parable that I was using was that the more Bitcoin grows, the more people start talking about philosophy, the more I just found it funny that a lot of the Protestant Catholic denominationalism debates about, like, should there even be a fork? How many forks of Christianity should there be allowed? Was sort of what I was hearing from developers in the Bitcoin community, where they're saying, well, we don't even think this Bitcoin, gold, this Bitcoin this Bitcoin that, like, we shouldn't even allow that. That shouldn't even be a thing. And it's sort of, I used to joke, it's sort of like getting a Catholic drunk and asking about Episcopalians. It's sort of like what it's like listening to a Bitcoin core developer talk about their opinions of any other type of fork.
Let me just sort of comment on that, because one thing is to say that there shouldn't be forks. Another thing is to say that they're not going to have a relevant impact and that they might even confuse the public, right? Like, one thing is predicting the effects of what's happening. The other one is saying it shouldn't happen, right? I think, Bitcoin is open source software for a reason, and it's known that people can fork it. They're cool with Litecoin, right? but it's more about a brand dilution, confusing client and customers, right?
Yeah, that's what a Catholic would say.
the fact that, well, but network effects are a thing, and people that don't accept that there's network effects, that we need to fight in the biggest front, are going to end up fighting in the smaller fronts and lose the bigger battle.
So are you saying that the UTXO is something that I can't fork or should not fork?
No, you certainly can, but you'll be in a separate network.
And can I jump in here and agree with Juan? Like, the network effects are incredibly important. Like, that's what this whole argument was about last year. And I was warning and cautioning everybody, if we don't allow Bitcoin to continue to provide people with a good user experience, it's going to lose its first mover advantage. It's going to lose market share. And last year when we were here in Acapulco, Bitcoin Core, BTC at the time, had a market share of around 85, 88% of the global crypto coin market share. Now it's about 35%. So I think we have a year's worth of empirical evidence under our belt that the things I was cautioning about with Bitcoin having full blocks and the high fees and unreliable transactions that they cause, we have absolute 100% proof that caused people to start using things other than Bitcoin, because Bitcoin's market share went from 85% down to about 35% today.
The large reason why ERC20 and Ethereum is the massive beast that it is because the Bitcoin Core developers were entirely incapable of getting sidechains done in a time that the market needed it. So, I talk to people who would say Lightning is the future, Lightning's great. And, well, we have a sidechain, we have Lightning. And I'm like, you don't get to decide when the market wanted a service or a product. The market gets to decide, and you guys are 3 years too late, And
in any other business, if you're 3 years late, you get fired. Your boss would fire you in an instant. And we're seeing that happen in the market now of crypto coins, because there's 1,001 different crypto coins. The market's deciding Bitcoin Core isn't as useful as we thought it was, or as it used to be. So now they're busy using Ethereum and Dash and Monero and, of course, Bitcoin Cash. And now we're several years behind where we would have been in terms of adoption.
So these
there's
go ahead, and I need to say something.
Yeah, I mean, markets take time, and information takes time to move. I think this year we're going to be seeing a lot of moves, right? If Lightning Network works, which so far it looks good to me, right? If mainnet is growing, testnet is growing, the network is distributing, right? If Lightning Network works and it has onion routing and people can sort of relay at very low transaction fees, right? And I mean, I just sent a Satoshi transaction like an hour ago, and you got a confirmation in the next 10 minutes. Right?
I don't think anyone's disparaging Lightning.
Yeah,
it's a brilliant technology.
So,
I just dislike the fact that it didn't happen in 2015.
Everyone wants it to work.
But this is part of the debate, right? I mean, we don't have perfect knowledge. So what ended up happening is we had to debate this thing for 3 years to figure it out.
Well, I don't. But so the we is an interesting question, because the thing about Bitcoin Core is that the developers who contribute to that are highly conservative and risk adverse.
Yeah.
They're sort of NASA in 2020, not NASA in 1970.
I'd like to point out that they claim to be highly conservative and risk adverse, but look at what they did. They took the most reckless path imaginable. So there's 1,001 altcoins out there, or cryptocurrencies, and Bitcoin Core was the first one ever in the entire history of cryptocurrencies to have full blocks and have a fee market. Why on earth would you experiment on the most widely spread and most widely used cryptocurrency in the world with this? That was an incredibly reckless, non-conservative thing to do. And Juan is shaking his head. Tell me why you don't think
because security is not free. You can sacrifice. This is my problem with Bitcoin Cash. You can sacrifice security in the long term in order to get a bigger blocks and bigger and cheaper transactions, or you can sacrifice transaction costs in the moment in order to maintain the security network, keep it more decentralized, and have that security in the future. We haven't really seen
the security doesn't matter if nobody's using it. And we saw
it's being used. It's still the top coin. It's still the top coin.
Depending on the metric, by lots of metrics, it's not. So it has less transactions per day than Ethereum, and in many days it has lower trade volume on the exchanges than other altcoins.
But it has the bigger price and more hashing power. So yeah, it depends how we look.
And on some days it doesn't even have the most hashing power.
But this is actually something that I just wanted to address, which is also the notion of what is an important aspect to you, because every system has maxims and minimums. Mm-hmm. And you say, well, this is something that we're going to always try to achieve to the detriment of everything else. And the way that Bitcoin Core is structured, hash rate is the one maxim that it will always sacrifice every other aspect to achieve more of. Mm-hmm. And then the question becomes, well, what is the underlying use case or the requirements for those use case? And do we still need to maximize for that one thing? Mm-hmm. It's sort of like that joke of a robot who accidentally has set the parameter to replicate to maximum, and then all it does is become the yellow goo that like changes the whole world because all it's doing is replicating. Is like Bitcoin. I think if you look at Bitcoin, at what point is hash rate no longer the maximum needed to achieve the use case that it was trying to achieve? At what point, like Bitcoin's, if you look at the amount of cost for per transaction, and you're like, okay, how oversecured is Bitcoin compared to every other payment network? If we had half of that, would the use case still work? If we had a third of that, would the use case still work?
And the same applies to this, somewhat nebulous concept of decentralization. Do we need an infinite amount of decentralization? And I would argue, no, we just need enough decentralization to make sure that the network is censorship resistant. So governments or other entities can't come in and censor the network. And that doesn't mean that every single person everywhere is running a full node.
I actually think that Bitcoin Core is amazing because of its security, because of its hash rate. I talk to a number of blockchains and permissioned ledgers, and I know those are evil, disgusting things, and I say, look, anchor into Bitcoin because it's immutable. It'll always be there. It's fantastic at that. I don't think anything's going to be better at it at that. But conversely, in order to achieve that, it sacrifices very important aspects and features that would be required to have other dynamics.
Yeah, and this is why.
Well, hold on. I'm glad you brought that back because I felt like we were kind of swaying in one direction where maybe we were being teamed up against Juan a little bit there. But I'm glad that you threw that in as a support. I think I was agreeing with Juan on more things than no, not you per se, but but that's a good point, which is that you can certainly, I think we can all agree, as Jonathan was just saying, that it could be argued, I'm not making this statement myself, but it could be argued because that's why we're here for this debate, that Bitcoin is sacrificing its use as a currency, but it still has its use as a really highly secure, immutable ledger. But let's bring it back even further, and then I want to start with the format again, just to give a little more organization to this that you had suggested with the questions for Roger.
I was enjoying this. I think the flow was good.
If you think that's good, then let's do it. But I just want to throw it as Jonathan was kind of saying, just to give my own clarification. May not be necessary, but I'm going to do it. Kind of like what you were saying, where all these forks are going to confuse people. Of course, on the flip side of that argument, people could say, well, that's competition. Isn't that a good thing? And that kind of brings it back to what Jonathan was saying and what Roger was saying is, how much decentralization do you need? In other words, on a more general level, it does come down to some certain fundamental philosophical differences that really depend, that really can't be resolved.
No, they may be resolved. We just need to kind of talk at that level, perhaps, right?
Right. But timing is important too. Like, life is short, things move quickly, and we want to beat governments to the punch on this. We want cryptocurrencies to be so widespread that governments don't even know what happened.
Yeah, but we also don't want to build a platform that becomes not secure enough so that once everybody's on it, the government can take it over, right?
If you've managed to defund the government, you've won. So let's defund the government.
You're not going to... Okay, so defunding the government is a battle on its own that's going to be like multi-generational. If you think this is going to happen in 10, 20 years...
Yeah, I think it is going to happen in 10 or 20 years, and that's why I'm here.
That's a different discussion in a sense, right? I'm all for, like, I think the reason I care about Bitcoin is because it's geopolitically stable money. It's politically stable.
It's not. We just watched Bitcoin go from being usable worldwide.
Yeah, but it wasn't a government takeover. It wasn't a Venezuelan sort of devaluation of the currency.
If I can finish the thought there, so we watched right in front of our eyes over the last couple of years, Bitcoin went from being useful for anybody to use to send any amount of money to or from anyone, anywhere in the world instantly, basically for free, to now something where people are cheering when businesses stop accepting Bitcoin as payments, and people are cheering about the fact that it's just a store of value and you shouldn't be using it for payments. We watched that happen right before our eyes over the last year or so here.
Yeah, well, we're transitioning to a second layer, right? Like, there was 3-4 months of peak volume. Let me finish, right? Of peak sort of transaction volume, and people are upset about that, of course. But in a sense, that pressure was to some degree useful to get people to move to second layer scaling, right? So, but there's three things that have happened since the fees went to the moon, right? Lightning Network is being developed. Segwit was implemented. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Some people are moving to altcoins, and transaction batching is being implemented.
It's not some. It is a lot. As someone who's been in this space for some time,
it's the majority now. Bitcoin Core is no longer the dominant coin. And I think that 35% market share.
I think that it's also scary because it's not just the percentage of people currently in the market, but of the new people who know nothing about blockchain and cryptocurrency that are being onboarded. The vast majority of them aren't experiencing the Bitcoin revolution. They're saying, look at this, look at that, and that's not being built on top of Bitcoin.
That's fine. And where can they spend their money? How many people can they actually exchange with? They're competing with a network that is 9 years older, and everybody knows Bitcoin. Very small portion know their particular market share. That's fine. They can have their niche little economies, and I love that. That's great. But there's no way to avoid one network being bigger than
Juan,
like most of them.
What
right?
do you think
so
about
which one is it going to be?
What do you think
right?
about the fact that Bitcoin Core's market share went from 85% last year to Anarchapulco to 35%?
Yeah, I mean things
What
fluctuate.
do you think the percentage is going to be next year?
In this market,
That's just volatility from 85% to 35%
well, people are
in
definitely
1
competing,
year.
right? This is a great competition.
And the reason they're competing is because
yeah.
Bitcoin Core has committed suicide by making the transactions super expensive, super unreliable. Why would anybody use something and super? Why would you use something that's slow, expensive, and unreliable?
Listen, I'll take the security.
Here?
No, hang on. I'll take the security of Bitcoin right now. Then the volatility of say the block production of Bitcoin Cash during the first 3-4 days, where there's 40 blocks an hour being produced. And we don't know who that money went to, right?
It went to the people that mine those blocks.
Yeah,
what do you mean?
And you know why miners log Bitcoin Cash that much?
Okay, well,
right?
let's get back. Let me try to ask a question to you.
We're talking about security, right? So you know why miners log Bitcoin Cash so much? Because and this is from like a Venezuelan miner, right? Because they get to use their old mining hardware again, make it profitable again.
So let me tell you
one
about
of the main business reasons.
Some
right?
Venezuelans that I met here at the conference yesterday. So one of them came up to me. And this is a pretty emotional experience for me. He came up to me and says, Roger, I just want to apologize to you. And I didn't know this person. Why are you coming up to me and wanting to apologize? He goes, initially I was brainwashed by the Core supporters, and I thought that Bitcoin Core is where it's at, and Roger's stupid, and Roger's talking about Bitcoin Cash. What's wrong with Roger? But then the fees got so high, and the fee to make one Bitcoin transaction was more than a month's salary for us in Venezuela, and we can't afford to do that. And now we all love Bitcoin Cash because it works as money. And this is a guy who traveled here from Venezuela, and he made a custom shirt for me with his company logo and the Bitcoin Cash logo right on there, and then my name on the back. And so he went out of his way to come and find me at this conference and apologize to me for previously having thought that I was wrong in regards to Bitcoin Cash. At the end of the day, it's the end user experience that we need to focus on. And Bitcoin Cash provides a fantastic end user experience. Ethereum provides a fantastic end user experience. All these altcoins are providing fantastic end user experiences. Bitcoin Core provides a horrible end user experience. And that's why we saw its market share drop from 85% last year at Anarchapulco to 35% that it is today.
Okay.
This happened during the past 4 months.
Let me,
you can make
Juan,
blank statements, but
let me interject, because I think this is an important thing that Roger brought up. End user experience. So what is the goal of a cryptocurrency? What is the goal of Bitcoin? I want to know that. I want an answer from you and an answer from Roger. I mean, Roger kind of just gave an answer. There's obviously a goal in mind. When you think that Bitcoin Core, or he thinks Bitcoin Cash is better, it's better by certain metrics that you have in mind that say, because it checks off all these boxes, it is better. It is going in the direction of an ideal cryptocurrency that we want. And I would argue that some of these metrics would be, which have already been mentioned or alluded to in another way, obviously security and immutability, low transaction fees, quick transaction times, and the like, right? So would you agree with any of these characteristics of what you're looking for, or what Bitcoin Core should be, or a well-functioning cryptocurrency should be? What should a well-functioning cryptocurrency be, and how does Bitcoin mark that off, and then how does Bitcoin Cash maybe mark that off?
Here's what I see. The reason Bitcoin is great and it's very secure and has, you know, the ethos that it has, even though it's certainly being questioned and debated today, is because it has massive redundancies. Everybody gets all the transactions, and it just, you know, everybody gets it, right? It's so far, like, you know, the blockchain has grown, but the intention of Core right now is to keep the actual sort of capacity of the network for the redundancy layer, right? Where people can sort of like keep it in consumer grade hardware. We want people to be able to run a full node, because that's the accounting system. If you can't verify the total supply of the coins, and you can't verify that the accounting has integrity, then you're basically using a bank and trusting that they're not manipulating the money supply. That's one of the things. The other, okay. And obviously the hashing power, right? So here's the thing. Here's what I care about. Keep in mind, too,
I want to say that all these metrics also are in balance with each other. In other words, like, you might have high security, like with Bitcoin Core, but are there things, I'm not saying there are, I'm just asking, are there things that are missing in Bitcoin Core that either render the high security level less relevant, or that could even reverse the high security level because of subsequent you know, things that happen?
Yeah, maybe that there's a point where Bitcoin will become so
So
such high
unusable that
security-
it loses 60% of its market share in just a year?
Well, just give it time. Growth takes time, right? We'll see what happens this year. But okay, let me finish my point. So I'm fine with all the altcoins that are sort of innovating and making sort of compromises and trying to do new things, and that's great. We're gonna need one coin that is very, very secure, and we want that one to be strong enough to handle geopolitical government attack if and when that happens.
So do you think
right?
a coin that has 85% market share is stronger for geopolitical attacks from governments than one with 35% market share?
Well, it's stronger than the rest of the altcoins.
I have a question, which is
Maybe.
that if a coin has more market share than Bitcoin, is Bitcoin the altcoin? When you say
yes.
Well,
altcoin,
Bitcoin was the first, right?
well,
So-
Bitcoin's first, but you're saying alt. Alt means alternative. And Bitcoin was the main coin because it had 85% of the market share.
So what do we call them then?
If Dash had 75% of the market share 2 years from now, would not the other 25 of the market be the alternative currencies?
And in terms of transactions per day, Bitcoin Core already is the altcoin. Ethereum has like 3 times more transactions per day on the network than Bitcoin
No.
Core.
Well,
Yeah.
Visa does a lot more. I mean,
This
who
is the good.
cares,
Well, right, but this is the good point of how are we defining altcoin? How are we
Yeah.
defining
I mean,
certain
I'm
things?
using
that
the
we're
word in the colloquial
No, I'm saying
term,
this.
right?
I'm
Like,
saying this for
we know
everything.
what it is.
But
I don't think we know what it means. That's why we're discussing it.
Well, yeah, well,
I think we should
Bitcoin,
agree
right?
on definitions. Otherwise, we can't have a
Okay.
a
Well,
fair
no, and
discussion.
this is I'm applying this to everybody. It just happens to apply to you just in the moment. I'm not picking on you.
Yeah.
But like we do need to define terms. Like what do we mean by altcoin? And then also, I talked about those metrics. You said Bitcoin was first. It's not always important to be first. The Model T was first. Is it still around?
Ethereum was fourth.
Yeah, I mean, there you go. And so if we say things like Bitcoin was first, or we talk about altcoins, we have to, we need to explain why does it matter if it's first, and then why does it matter, or what does altcoin mean?
Well,
and again, this applies. Everyone throws around loose language here. We just need to tighten it
I
up.
think I gave what I believe a main coin would be the coin with the largest market share. What do you?
Market share is defined as market cap or number of transactions per
Well,
day
that's
or number of
so
dollars
like
of
what would
transactions.
what would you guys define a main coin versus an altcoin even mean?
I think there's quite a few metrics, and so like by number of transactions per day, like Ethereum is the main coin. By terms of market cap, Bitcoin Core is still the main coin. By number of dollars moved per day on the network, I think it fluctuates from day to day between Bitcoin Core and Ethereum, and so there's quite a few metrics there. Maybe you have to take 5 metrics and say, okay, this coin has 3 of the 5, so it's the winner today. But it changes a bit from day to day. But it's clear that Bitcoin Core used to have all of those metrics firmly within its control, and it was firmly the coin, and everything else was an altcoin compared to it. And now that the user experience for people using Bitcoin has been destroyed, and been destroyed intentionally by Bitcoin supporters when they say that they want the transactions to be slow, expensive, and unreliable.
So that's a mischaracterization.
Well, let's talk about it. You advocate for the blocks being full on Bitcoin Core, is that right?
No, I advocate for.
So you don't want the blocks to be full?
Huh?
Do you disagree or agree with Greg Maxwell and the rest of the Blockstream team? They say they want the blocks to be full and for there to be a fee market where people are bidding against each other for inclusion in the blocks, and that only happens when the blocks are full. So do you agree or disagree with their point of view on that?
Security is not free.
Can you answer my question though?
Well, your question is biased. It's not a good question.
Well, it's very clear. Do you want the blocks to be full, or do you not want the blocks to be full?
I want a secure currency that.
So in order to
cannot
do
be
a
controlled in the
secure
future.
currency, do you want the blocks to be full or not to be full?
This is a non-question, right? Like
why can't
so
you answer a simple question? We can look on the
if
blockchain and see if
the
they're
demand,
full or not.
Demand for a very secure financial cryptographic database is infinite. Okay.
So do you want the
Everybody
blocks?
wants to put everything on the blockchain so that it's super secure.
So
right?
Juan, I'm asking you a very simple question. Would your preference be for the blocks to be full or for the blocks not to be full on the Bitcoin Core blockchain?
I'm not going to answer this question because you're trying to pin me into a position, and my position is I want security and
Your
I want
position is
scalability.
that you won't answer
and
my
I
simple
want,
question, or
Is
I'm not
there
gonna answer
a
that question.
third position to his binary
Yeah, there is.
question, or and what?
Yeah, there is. It's like this is like asking, should people be able to buy and trade drugs or not being able to buy to trade drugs?
they should
Like,
be able to
whatever they
buy
wanna
and
do.
trade drugs. It's a simple answer. Should the blocks be full or should they not be full? What is your preference? I'm asking you.
Well,
Juan Galt,
that's not up to
specifically.
me. That's not up to me. People will
Well,
use the transactions
I
and volume will
understand that.
grow. Yeah.
I understand that you're not the
This is a
god of the
known question.
blockchain. I'm asking
Yeah.
you for your own personal preference, even
Mm-hmm.
though I understand that you're not god of Bitcoin, and nobody is.
Yeah.
Would your personal preference be for the blocks to be full or the blocks not to be full on the Bitcoin Core network?
I mean, if I'm using Lightning networks, it's not going to matter as much. It's going to
It
be a lot
matters
more
incredibly.
volume.
Well, And Lightning Network has yet to be implemented. So let me
It's
ask,
being implemented.
But,
It's
well, I
already
mean,
entering.
Adopted.
It's
It's
adopted.
adopted in
sorry.
production.
Adopted.
It's still a bit of a science project at this point.
Right.
That's
It's functional.
So
like
let me-
SegWit transactions.
Well, let me ask you this. So, it's clear, kind of even going back to what Jonathan was saying, and I'm glad that he actually is here and having said his sort of take on the philosophical underpinnings of this. So it's clear that security is really important to you in a cryptocurrency. And obviously 99%, if not 100% of people would say that as well. You've even alluded to the fact that there are trade-offs, or at least potential trade-offs, not some, I would say some statements of trade-offs aren't necessarily true or necessarily the case. But so we understand that you really value security, but in the long term, is security alone going to be enough to make the number one cryptocurrency?
No,
And it's clearly not, because it's lost so much market share from last year to this year. And
I still believe in the vision of sidechains, which was this notion that if you go back, so let's talk Bitcoin, 2014, Adam Maxwell, they did this episode, and they said, here's our vision for Bitcoin and the future of Bitcoin. And they said the problem is that you can't experiment on Bitcoin, that we want it to be secure, we want it to be robust, but we need a framework for experimentation. And all these people are going outside of Bitcoin to experiment, and what we need to do is create some interoperability framework so you to be able to have these new weird dynamics that the market wants that we don't want Bitcoin to currently have because we haven't tested and made it secure enough. And I love Bitcoin for its security. It's fantastic. I think it's the best at it. And I think that everyone should be reliant upon Bitcoin security. Like every altcoin should basically say, well, we're secure because we're just hashing into Bitcoin.
when I see Bitcoin's market share drop from 85% to 35% in 1 year, I don't feel very secure about that.
But that's
future.
But that's a feature of not allowing experimentation and innovation on the network. And
that's probably some of the problems that we agree on, right? So Bitcoin should have been allowed to grow for more and more people to use it and build platforms like Ethereum and all these these altcoins would have been built on top of Bitcoin.
Here's one of the reasons we have this conflict.
Make a statement. I'm going to ask you a question after that.
Yeah, one of the reasons we have this problem that we're exploring right now, which is interoperability versus security, and how do you implement that, was probably because there are certain hard forks that you needed to do, right? And what happens, and this is an argument that I think is compelling, but we would need data to verify on this. When you do a hard fork, you're basically ending a contract, or at least sort of breaking a contract with the initial people that enter this agreement, and you're changing the contract, right? And so what happened in the fork with the Bitcoin Cash is Bitcoin Core said, we're going to create a second layer called SegWit, right? And from there, we're going to create Lightning, and that's how we're going to solve transaction malleability and its scale. And it's opt-in. It's completely opt-in. You can still use normal Bitcoin. Right. And if people are really moving to these second layers, then transaction fees may be low or reasonable, right? What Bitcoin Cash did says that they forked, and now everybody enters into a new agreement where everybody is on-chain and building sort of, layer protocols, I don't know what you guys are doing.
So Vitalik Buterin wrote a fantastic essay on this exact point, and he points out how soft forks are coercive because they force everybody to come along to the new paradigm, whereas hard forks are voluntary because you can choose whether or not you want to go on that new fork or not.
Yeah, but you're splitting the network, right?
Well, but
let's talk about
you're giving people a real choice, though. I mean, I can't help it. I don't want to sound biased, but I can't help agree with that characterization because a soft fork, the whole network goes along regardless. You can't do anything about it. A hard fork, I mean, you could argue
choose to go with them or not.
You could argue about certain possible disruptions, but you can choose one way or another.
And let's talk about splitting the network.
Today, so there's no real.
The entire reason for doing segregated witnesses as a soft fork is so we wouldn't split the network. That was the entire goal, and that was the entire reason everybody was cheerleading for it. Right. Look at the end result. It shattered the Bitcoin ecosystem into 1,001 altcoins.
That's actually a good question. Was SegWit a soft fork or a hard fork?
SegWit, soft fork, right?
It was a soft fork?
Yeah, no.
I mean, it forked the network
into dozens of different flavors of Bitcoin.
So, but this comes down to what you consider consensus, right? Because you have protocol consensus and then you have market consensus. And it was a market hard fork, but it was a protocol soft fork, right? It was a restriction on rules, but it created two UTXOs that maintained themselves in perpetuity.
It has the exact opposite effect of what they were claiming was the reason we had to do it.
This type of
everyone got onto SegWit.
Well, and it's not, this type of confusion should not be like, no one should feel bad for being this confused. NIST wrote a report a couple of weeks ago, and it was so confusing for them that they couldn't understand how to interpret SegWit's implementation to then understand which Bitcoin was the original Bitcoin versus the non-original Bitcoin. Like, when you get so convoluted that you confuse NIST in cryptography, like that's an achievement in and of itself.
Actually, NIST can be confused about a lot of things, but that's a whole other thing. What I want to ask while we're on, I mean, this is kind of a fair characterization because, like, for instance, when I help someone set up a Trezor wallet, if I recall, it basically asked, "Do you want it on SegWit or not?" And so the point being, there is a sort of quasi middle ground situation where, like he said, there's sort of a market fork going on, even though it's technically a protocol soft fork, if I'm interpreting it correctly. But let me ask you this too. So in a related fashion, if Lightning Network is the way to go, and it still may be, I guess the correct word is adopted eventually by Bitcoin, why didn't Bitcoin Core? It's clear that SegWit may have been a slight improvement, and of course, there's all the issues that some people have issues with the way SegWit handles digital signatures. That people say is problematic. We can talk about that if we want, but why? If Bitcoin Core was looking to the long term to implement Lightning Network, why not in the medium term? Because it's clear that I mean, I don't want to say it's clear and sound biased, but considering transaction times and transaction fees, SegWit doesn't seem to have really solve the issue in the short term. Why not increase the block size in preparation for the Lightning Network, at least temporarily? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so for the record, I don't work with Bitcoin Core. I'm not an engineer. I've been in this space for about 5 years, so I understand the technology at a certain depth. And I'm not here representing Bitcoin Core necessarily, but though I am defending their decisions to a certain degree because I think that they've made proper sacrifices for various reasons, right?
They sacrificed a bunch of market share and a bunch of adoption and set us back years.
Yeah.
So,
but I mean, to be fair, Bitcoin Core doesn't. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Let him answer, though. Let him answer. So
your question is, why did they not just increase the block size in the moment?
Yeah.
Because if you increase the block size in the moment, then companies keep doing what they're doing and they don't implement the new layer scaling solutions.
Well, but except because Bitcoin Core could say, though, they could telegraph saying, okay, we're increasing the block size to 2 megabytes or 3. Not a big jump, just enough to kind of handle recent congestion. But we're going to turn over to Lightning Network in a year or 6 months. And why not give a roadmap like that so that there is no expectation by companies or whatever to just stick with doing what they're doing. You know what I'm saying?
It was to get people to move to a scaling strategy that is exponential, not linear.
Right.
So scaling on-chain is exponential scaling, right? Thanks to Moore's law, computer costs drop in half about every 18 years, right?
Bandwidth doesn't grow with Moore's law.
It grows slightly slower than Moore's law. It still grows. In my place in Tokyo, I have a 2 gigabit connection up and down, and it costs about $38 US a month.
I will fairly state that Moore's law has an upper limit, probably. So I'm not saying that
they've been saying that for decades, and we haven't hit that upper limit yet, and I don't think we're going to hit that upper limit.
But to be fair, Bitcoin is a Chinese framework, and the Chinese firewall was a bandwidth constriction on what can and can't happen in the network.
So there's all sorts of new technologies that help penetrate the Great Firewall of China without any problem at all. But one thing that, if I can add a little bit more to that, like one of the things that I'm most excited about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies is their ability to tear down the Great Firewall of China and their ability to tear down these barriers that governments are putting between human beings on the planet. Let's use cryptocurrencies to influence the Chinese government, either with carrots or with sticks, to tear down the Great Firewall of China that's retarding the rate of economic growth of every single human being on the planet. It doesn't just hurt the Chinese in China. It hurts all the people outside of China as well because they can't interact with these people.
Wait, can I say something? Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall. Sorry.
But like what Roger's saying is something that concerned me back when Gavin Andresen was in charge of Bitcoin, because he gave a Council on Foreign Relations talk. And like, I want to know and I want to know the philosophy behind decisions as they occur, because you can technically justify anything, but ultimately it's a philosophical decision. And he was asked what he thought the greatest concern to Bitcoin was, like a bug or an some sort of issue. And he said, no, I don't fear a bug issue would be the thing that could kill Bitcoin. He said, my greatest fear for Bitcoin is that if society ever deemed it unpatriotic, quote unquote. So like, I can pull it up. We can get the audio clip. You can play it. And when I heard that, I said, wow, that's an entirely different framework for understanding how to deploy Bitcoin than when I hear someone like Roger talk, or when I hear somebody like another.
I guess I'm not a patriot.
I mean, I think I understand what you're saying, but can you clarify? Is he saying like, it's unpatriotic to use Bitcoin in
Yes.
people's minds because, oh, you got to use the dollar.
Well, remember there was this phase when we didn't know if Bitcoin was legal or illegal, and it was this notion of if society said that this is more harm than good.
Oh, okay.
But by definition, by the position of China wants to, in the understanding that Roger has for how Bitcoin should proceed in China will deem Bitcoin as a harm to its society, but that's a moral good because what China is doing is a moral evil to its people.
And our best offense in regards to governments trying to demonize Bitcoin as not being, or cryptocurrencies as not being patriotic, is to get as many people using them around the world as fast as we possibly can. If everybody is using cryptocurrencies to buy their dog food and to pay for their pay-per-view and whatever else in their daily life, and governments trying to say, oh, this is evil, nobody's going to believe them, right? Because everybody's using it already anyhow.
But they have to be able to verify the consensus rules. Like to me, that this like the consumer grade verification. And maybe I'm wrong about, like, we don't know exactly how this thing is going to play out. But to me, the principle of verifying the consensus rules, consumer grade hardware, is equivalent to the Second Amendment and being able to own your right to bear arms and defend your property at home.
So
right?
first of all,
that's important.
On consumer grade hardware right now today, you can easily handle a node running 100 megabyte blocks, like no problem at all with a home internet connection and like home hardware, no problem at all. But let's take a step back and let's think, like, if you wanted to destroy cryptocurrency adoption and delay this whole thing to the world, if you were an evil government and you wanted people not to use it, look at what's happened, right? I can't think of a way that could have possibly been more damaging to cryptocurrencies in general. They have shattered the ecosystem into dozens of different versions of Bitcoin, into thousands of altcoins. Consumer adoption has been delayed by years. All the businesses that used to be integrating Bitcoin, allowing people to use it for commerce, got put on hold so we could figure out what's going to happen with the scaling debate and which cryptocurrency is going to be the winner in the end. The entire ecosystem has been delayed by years and shattered into 1,000 different warring factions. If you were a government that wanted to delay the adoption of cryptocurrency, you couldn't possibly have implemented a better strategy than what has happened, intentionally or not. I'm not claiming that they did this on purpose, but look at the end results. I can't think of a worst case scenario that could have happened to cryptocurrencies than the scaling civil war that shattered Bitcoin into a bunch of different versions of Bitcoin.
So for those who are interested
altcoins
on that topic, the RAND Corp for the DoD wrote a paper. It's 80 pages. It's called The National Security Implications of Virtual Currencies Deployed by Non-State Actors. So if you want to read a report about how the U.S. government would actually like to kill a blockchain, read that paper. It's a fun paper.
And it seems like they've pretty clearly succeeded, because the new adoption has been severely delayed and hindered. And I see Juan shaking his head.
You can grab anything and turn it into a conspiracy theory, right?
Well,
but
I mean,
this could very much be a market event,
no,
right?
but
like we didn't know how to scale Bitcoin. There's a multiplicity of options, and the market is playing them out.
To
question
assist
is which
Juan,
one's going to succeed.
because I live in New York, like, the fact that Bitcoin can now split on your balance sheet as a custodial is freaking them the hell out. They don't know how to understand that. They didn't sign up for that. Do you want to
explain that for people who don't?
Well, yeah, because so if you're custodial on behalf of somebody else, you have rules and permissions and regulations and insurance that you have on a very specific fact pattern for a very specific asset. And when Bitcoin became two types of Bitcoin, it blew up all of those models, all of those frameworks, all of those structures. Coinbase took forever to release the Bitcoin Cash, not because they technically couldn't do it, but because legally, what did that event even mean? Structurally, like, did their insurance even cover it? They had insurance on Bitcoin,
or
not
were they
to
technically
Bitcoin.
Stealing if they kept the Bitcoin Cash?
And it was just
or whatever,
like the amount of issues that resolve from now the industry understands that these frameworks of ownership can be forked, and you can have assets that you didn't consent to being in custody on behalf of.
That's a good point.
Really, from an institutional standpoint, do a bit of damage. Now, I believe that would have occurred because they needed to have that level of understanding.
Right.
But that Bitcoin Cash occurred in that way did have this effect where people were like, well, I didn't know that this was a property of crypto, that this wasn't a surface area of risk that I understood. And that's also made them push back on adoption.
So, but, okay, that may be fair, but, like, this kind of gets back to what I said earlier, there are opportunity costs. In other words, like, let me take a balanced approach, which is to say that, the forks may have led to confusion, both with, like, these custodial and legal rules. It may have led to confusion for people on the market who just don't know enough about Bitcoin to understand what fork means and a new coin. But, again, this is also the competitive process. So the competitive process has its own opportunity costs and trade-offs. So, I mean, I think the points on both sides are valid. But again, it's kind of what kind of balance are we achieving here? And you could really argue both sides without never really, really resolving it. Because again,
that's why we have a marketplace, right? So because we don't have perfect knowledge,
right? But we now have lots of evidence, and we saw that the strategy that Core took was wrong because it resulted in Bitcoin losing market share from being around 90% to 35%.
But maybe let me throw this out. What if Bitcoin maintaining 90% market share? And I'm just playing devil's advocate. What if that meant that Bitcoin became sort of a market monopolist, and that led to a delay in innovations of Bitcoin or cryptocurrency in general because of its maintaining its position without more competition coming to the fore?
But
you know what I'm saying?
You can't avoid that to some degree. That's the Pareto principle. You identify a group, 4% of that group will be responsible for about 40% of the output of that group. That's a statistical sort of law distribution.
But I mean,
to some degree, you can't.
But I also think
yeah.
like I like the notion of the construct of market share in the 5 different ways you can describe it. But like Bitcoin says, at least Bitcoin Core says, we will not compromise on signal integrity and security. Those are our attributes. And maybe only 20% of the market thinks that that's an important aspect. Like you look at PGP versus Signal versus just Facebook messaging, and it's like how much is that signal integrity an important characteristic that the market wants? And maybe Bitcoin Core achieving its perfect manifestation is something that only at the end of the day 20% of the market wants, and maybe that is exactly what it should be in this marketplace.
Yeah, now let's talk about Lightning here, because the reason why I think Lightning is interesting is that it builds on top of Bitcoin's very secure, very robust, and yes, expensive compared to other alternatives layer. And then it says, okay, great. So you create a smart contract account with somebody else, and then you can route the transactions and the information directly to them and through them to other people, right? And it's audience routed, so it uses Tor's anonymity sort of system, right? And the way, as far as I understand it, they pick the nodes. The sending node picks 20 sort of random nodes, right? And you are going to be somewhere in those 20, and it sends it through, and nobody knows who the person was that got it.
This all sounds wonderful, but at the end of the day, it'll work better, faster, cheaper, more reliably on top of Bitcoin Cash than it will on top of Bitcoin Core anyhow.
But if okay, let's say that Bitcoin Cash was the one that won the great sort of market
I'm saying
Lightning
Network.
Right?
I'm saying Lightning Network will work better, faster, cheaper, and more reliably on Bitcoin Cash than Bitcoin Core.
So what you're saying is it's not even a question of Lightning Network versus raising the block. It's that if raising the block or not, it would work faster.
Are you guys implementing
according
Lightning?
to him on Bitcoin
Is Bitcoin Cash implementing Lightning Network?
It doesn't need it. Bitcoin Cash transactions are already lightning fast.
Well, let me ask you: has anyone done any comparison testing of raising the block size? I mean, obviously we have some empirical evidence from Bitcoin Cash, but is there any empirical testing that's been done between Lightning Network and raising the block size on a network like Bitcoin as far as speed, or do you know, or is that?
How about if we test right now, and you can send me one Bitcoin Cash, and you send me a Bitcoin, and I get to keep them.
we can do that. Do you have a Lightning Network that you can receive a Lightning Network payment? No? Who here has a Lightning wallet? And my hand's not up because I don't have one. I see one in the room out of the entire room of like 30 people here.
We're transitioning into a new layer. I mean, give it time.
Well, let's get back to that question then, because we never really answered it.
It looks like, Juan, do you have a Lightning Network?
We're experimenting with it, yeah.
So that's a yes?
Yeah.
So there's one person in this entire room.
Oh, somebody else raised their hand. There we go.
No.
Okay.
He raised his hand to say 0. He doesn't have one. So you are the only person in this entire room who has a Lightning Network wallet. So at the end of the day,
who has a Bitcoin Cash wallet here? Just to get
who has a Bitcoin Cash wallet?
Okay, right on.
Maybe
what about Bitcoin?
Maybe 7/8. 7/8 of the room. I have at least 5.
Well, so I actually have never separated my Bitcoin. I like to keep my children together. So,
right on. It's
and I think that kind of shows to the point. Like maybe Lightning Network will be wonderful, but what the ecosystem has shown is that it's easier for them to switch to altcoins than it is to implement the Lightning Network, and that's why we've seen currencies like Dash and Ethereum and all these other ones gain market share and gain traction.
For now, like we're the future is what we're talking about here, right? Like you're saying that it's done. I'm saying it's not done yet.
So one of the guys that we had, kind of similar discussions with last year, there was a guy named Tone Vase that I had a debate on this year last year, and I quote, Mr. Tone Vase. He said, "SegWit solves all of your scaling problems immediately." here we are a year later, and
Well, have you
the
seen transaction
scaling
fees?
problems are worse than ever.
I just sent an 8 Satoshi transaction, and it confirmed the next block, right?
Okay.
So at
And
least
what-
there's some evidence. There's some evidence that things are getting better.
One
right?
data point. You can't use
No,
one
it's
data
been for
point.
a
And
week.
what would that have
It's
cost?
happened for a week. I can show
What
you
would
the
that have
charts.
cost last month, Juan?
No? Yeah, well, that was a transition period.
So
When you-
last month it
sometimes
would
when
have
you
cost
grow,
around
there's growing
$50.
pains, right?
This month, fewer
Yeah.
people are making Bitcoin transactions, so the fees came down. That's not
Well,
a sign
no,
of
you
success.
have
That's a sign of
transaction
failure.
batching, you have transaction batching, you have SegWit, and then people are sort of experimenting.
And all those transaction batching and these things you're talking about, like these all erode people's privacy, right? That's one of the other really big things that as a libertarian, you should be terrified. By making the blocks full, you have undermined people's ability to have private Bitcoin transactions. You made it too expensive for them to use Bitcoin mixers and other privacy tools. And if you made it much, much easier for governments to spy on what everybody's doing with their Bitcoin
What's
transactions.
Bitcoin Cash doing about privacy?
There's all sorts of privacy tools that are being brought
Like
to
what?
Bitcoin Cash, like coin mixers and coin shuffling tools
Uh-huh.
and all sorts of tools like that were priced out of the market on Bitcoin Core
Well,
and made
we
people
have
start using
Lightning
things other than
Network with
Bitcoin
Erosion
Core.
routing, which
You're
does
the
not
only
doesn't.
person in the entire room who has a Lightning.
Well, that's
Well,
no,
it's
but
being
I mean,
developed. It's being developed, dude.
that it does
Like-
take time for the market to learn how to use
Okay,
something.
It
Yeah,
does,
that's
but
take
we've
time,
seen
but let me-
the market is moving to altcoins rather than to Lightning.
Well, right.
Network.
So let me ask this
and
question.
to false security solutions like
Yeah.
Zcash.
Okay, it does take time, and there's certain like orders of time preference
That's
here
the
that
next
go
debate on the
into.
next show.
Or coins that people feel safe around, and then the government might start attacking them, and we'll see what
Well,
happens.
okay,
right?
but
So-
even that is a probabilistic sort of guessing game, right? Like it's
Yeah,
a risk. It's a risk utilizing Bitcoin Cash versus Bitcoin Core. It's a risk because Bitcoin Cash may be theoretically less secure, but it's a risk using Bitcoin Core because it's so expensive and slow. And so my point is, to quote John Maynard Keynes, and whom I hate to quote because he's a charlatan, but in the long run, we're all dead, he said. So my point is, like, if
And
Bitcoin,
can I quote Murray Rothbard in regards to that quote? So John Maynard Keynes said when they were asking, well, what about inflation in the future? And he said, in the long run, we're all dead. Don't worry about that. And in the late 1970s, when we had stagflation, something Keynes said was impossible, Murray Rothbard wrote about. They said, well, now Keynes is dead, and we're all living in his long run. And that's exactly what's happened with Bitcoin Core here. They said, oh, well, don't
that's
worry
what's gonna
about
happen with
future
Bitcoin
adoption.
Cash.
Well, now look at this. We've lost all the adoption. We're living in the future that Bitcoin Core
No.
created. And that's
We're in the-
exactly what happened.
That's what we're
So
gonna end up
Bitcoin
with
is now
Bitcoin
almost
Cash.
an altcoin. It's a minority share coin.
Is core being too long term, and there is such a thing as being too long term because of the way reality works and markets work. So
This is a fundamental change to society. Like money is very,
we get
very
that, but-
deep,
but
right?
that's what I'm saying, but
So
answer-
yeah, we need to think long term,
But
not short term.
no. But you can't
Yeah.
think long term without thinking short term. In other words, like for instance,
Yeah, well, we'll
you
see-
can't have
we'll
a great
see if
wall
the
of.
market
We
adapts.
already saw Bitcoin lost almost all of its market share. Bitcoin's first mover advantage has
Here's
been
my concern
completely
for Bitcoin
destroyed
Cash.
at this point.
Okay,
And that's from the
there's talk
first
about
investor in the entire world in Bitcoin startups.
Okay.
Bitcoin's first mover advantage has been destroyed by Bitcoin Core. That's inarguable. Look at its market share.
they're still the biggest one. They're still the biggest one. You can say that,
Only
but
by
they're
a
still the
couple of
biggest one.
metrics. By other metrics, they no longer are. And I'll make a prediction.
But by
By
other
the end of
metrics,
this year,
yeah.
I don't think Bitcoin Core will be the top cryptocurrency in terms of market
I
cap.
think
Well,
it'll
and-
be $50,000.
So
at the
I
end
will
of the
say,
year,
to be
so.
fair, that we don't
Yeah.
know the extent to which the market share lost by Bitcoin Core is attributable to, what he's alluding to. But I would argue that it's probably pretty big.
I would
sure.
be most concerned about Bitcoin Core as it relates to its market cap ownership of hash rate, because all the other major systems that use proof of work seem to be their roadmap is giving up proof of work. And what I love is this notion that are at the aspects that proof of work has, that it doesn't compromise as it grows. So Ethereum saying, well, we're going to succeed. How are we going to succeed? We're going to give up proof of work, and we're going to hope that all of the benefits of proof of work will sustain itself even when we no longer have that. And maybe Ethereum will have a massive market cap, and it's this proof of work blockchains that Bitcoin gets to say, well, we're 90% of that. And maybe that is a very important characteristic, that Bitcoin Core becomes the proof of work cryptocurrency.
So kind of comparing apples to oranges as far as like market cap. When if Ethereum goes to proof of stake,
if you look at parameters like transaction volume or even the market cap, like the thing that I get disgusted by Ethereum every day is Gavin Wood and Vitalik are grossly negligent in the security and when it's other people's money. That's the way they work. And the market loves first movers, but they're grossly negligent. I don't hear Bitcoin Core losing $250 quarter billion dollars, excuse me, I can't even use the words, of other people's money every 3 months.
I think they did because they lost that so much market share. All that market share would have been on Bitcoin Core.
We just went to $20,000.
But like Bitcoin Core is great because they don't screw around with security.
Losing market share counts as losing security, right? If they hadn't lost all that market share, there would have been more security on the Bitcoin network.
We're 6x from where we were last year.
No, but we're talking about actual Bitcoin.
And where would it have been, right? Because
But Bitcoin Core has never screwed up the transaction or the actual framework of Bitcoin to the point where you could say, well, that's a 250,000 Bitcoin that has just gone because of the way we implemented.
But you could probably say that there's $250 million worth of value that didn't make it into the Bitcoin.
From an investor perspective, that's important.
You're talking about the DAO exploit, right?
No, I'm talking about like a dozen different issues that Ethereum has. One is the parity wallet bug. The other one was there was the multi-sig issue where like there was 30 million that was lost. There was the fact that Ethereum allows invalid transactions to be sent. So you just send your money to a 00 address and it's gone rather than denying that transaction.
Yeah,
there are all these ways that the Bitcoin Core Foundation, because they take a moment, because they think it through, because they're like, wait, what are the actual implications of that? Right. I would never even think that would happen.
And that's
in Bitcoin.
great, and that's to their credit.
But the detriment to that is that you lose market share because people like having something, even if there's a 1 in 1,000 chance it won't work, and you get a bigger market share. So I personally think that Bitcoin might succeed, and success just might look like 10% of the market, because only 10% of people actually want secure things. Like only 10% of the people actually want things that their money might not disappear.
Okay, well, and that's valid too, because along the lines of trade-offs, like I was saying, there's also preferences on the market. You're right. Some people, and that's kind of what I was asking Juan about.
It's like libertarianism will never have more than 10% of the country liking it because it requires you to be a good person and to have integrity. And how many of the world has that?
I'd be pretty happy.
I mean, and that's a fair point too. That like Bitcoin could remain around again because of its immutability and security. But I mean. Again, I guess the point still is, though, is that going to be enough is that going to make Bitcoin then just a very limited application on the market? Or is it or can it still be the main cryptocurrency that everyone uses?
Juan, outside of Lightning, when are we going to get all those other aspects of sidechains that we were told would happen in 2014?
Yeah, I don't know.
What year were we told they were going to happen?
2014, 2013?
What year are we recording this now?
I think 2018. It's just...
And here's the thing: it's not just about timing. It's not just about predictions on the timing. And of course, everyone gets those wrong, especially in software development. It's about, can you run the train long enough before the fuel runs out to get to the end point? So I mean,
that's the question.
With Bitcoin being slow and high fees, relatively speaking, even if it's lower than it was a month ago or something. Is it going to be able to chug along enough without being chipped away by the time we get to Lightning Network? Do you know what I'm saying?
To me, it's statistically, like the most likely scenario is there's going to be about 5 altcoins or 5 cryptocurrency protocols. And which ones do we want? Do we want medium security coins, or do we want at least one that's really hardcore in security?
Well, there's probably going to be
all
all
the things
of them, like he said, for various
think,
preferences on the market. Sorry, go ahead.
I think I want there to be a very, very strong, secure cryptocurrency somewhere. And I think Bitcoin has all the characteristics for it. Satoshi left. There's no primary company behind it. It's got the network effect. It's got the brand. It's got the global community. I think that's a strong foundation to build on. And then, people can do things around and peg and do whatever they're going to do, and the internet of money will grow. Right?
But it may or may not have the network effect, though, because even if people want that security and the Lightning Network comes around, like he said, Bitcoin can still lose to Bitcoin Cash or other altcoins that are faster and cheaper.
They will have to massively fuck up. And
can I ask you a question about massively something up? So for the first 7 or 8 years of Bitcoin's existence, the blocks were never full, and
nobody was using it.
Okay, hold on. So the blocks were never full. The transactions were fast, cheap, and reliable. And then by Bitcoin Core's intentional design, they made the blocks become full, which then caused the transactions to become expensive, slow, and unreliable. Was that a conservative thing to do or a reckless thing to do?
It was.
And during the first 7 or 8 years, it grew to be this worldwide phenomenon.
Yeah, but there's a scaling. Like you're simplifying this argument to the point where it doesn't have any information in it. Like you can say that it's all about the blocks because they want to destroy it. I say the reason they didn't grow the blocks is because they want high redundancy, like smaller chain, and they needed to pressure, in a sense, people to move to the second layer and third layers.
So you're telling me that
scaling.
So we had like the 7 or 8 years of the blocks not being full, which allowed
because nobody was using it, man. Like,
because nobody was using it, and that allowed the transactions to be fast, cheap, and reliable. Yeah. And it allowed Bitcoin to grow into this worldwide phenomenon where tons of people were using it. And then they changed that formula to make the blocks full, causing the transactions to be slow, expensive, and unreliable.
They didn't change the formula. They just refused to make a hard fork.
In order to keep Bitcoin the same, meaning the blocks were not full and the transactions were fast, cheap, and reliable, they changed that formula to the blocks being full, so the transactions were then slow, expensive, and unreliable. You're telling me that that was a conservative approach to take because of security reasons? Is that what you just said?
They did not change the formula. They refused to hard fork the block size.
So you're saying that changing the blocks
they focused on a different growth
not full to full is not changing the formula? Is that what you just told me?
They refused to hard fork. I mean, that's what I told them.
So allowing the blocks to become completely full, causing the transactions to be slow, expensive, and unreliable, that wasn't changing the formula?
You're just repeating the same thing over and over again, right?
I think what he's asking is that is a risk that occurs because you didn't take an action worse than a risk that might occur if you do take an action. And that philosophically, what he perceives in Bitcoin Cash is this understanding that risks that occur or could occur by inaction are just as valid as risks that could occur by action. And that from the understanding as a third party or not a person who's not a developer in the Bitcoin community, Bitcoin Core very much overemphasizes changes that occur because they made a change rather than changes that occur because they didn't make a change.
Well put.
And do you believe that risks, if you have 100 units of risk, and 100 units of risk can happen because you made an action or because you didn't make an action, are those equal? Is that the same level of risk is what he's asking?
I don't know the answer to that question.
And if you were to ask the core developers of Bitcoin Cash and of Bitcoin Core, is 100 units of risk through inaction or action the same amount of risk? I believe that those two groups would give you two fundamentally different answers.
What would be the answers?
I think that Bitcoin Core believes that risks accruing through inaction are superior to risks occurring through action because of the amount of unknown external potential catastrophic failure
and that's
states.
A conservative decision making.
Which is a form of conservatism that as an entrepreneur Roger fears.
It's the reckless route.
Because there's an amount of catastrophic failure that can occur through inaction, through the fear of competitors.
And we've seen the catastrophic failure happen. Bitcoin's market share in just the last year dropped from 85% to 35% in just one single year. And now there's 1,001 altcoins vying for market share. That's a catastrophic failure.
And you can argue that's an incidental historical datum that it just happened that way. But I would say in general, the principle is true that it's often riskier to take no action than to take action because you have to adapt to the environment, and sometimes you make the wrong choices.
Is it riskier, or is it easier to blame a specific person when they're the one making the action, rather than easier to your reputation to not take an action?
That's a good point.
Because there are negative internalities that occur when you're trying to fix a system. Bitcoin's all about taking systems and dynamics and financializing the activities around them. And the problem with action is that you get to point to the person who did it, rather than inaction where it's just a state of nature.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and thank you for explaining that, because that's a way of looking at it that I hadn't heard before, but it makes a lot of sense. I think this reveals sort of the psycho classes in a sense in general that make up these communities, right? So the Bitcoin Core strategy, at least the people that are on the technical side, there's a conservatism. There is not that same drive of a quick adaptation, quick innovation that entrepreneurs have and that you have, right? And there's
also an unwillingness to spend 6 months having people call you the devil.
Well, but I mean, there's reasons for that, and we don't have to
look at the brain drain that has happened within Bitcoin. So all sorts of wonderfully fantastic,
because of
genius
Twitter
people.
Troll wars, right?
No, we're busy working on Bitcoin, and some of the people within the Bitcoin Core community were so toxic and vitriolic towards anybody with a different opinion that they left Bitcoin Core.
You can
right?
say,
they started things like Ethereum. They started things like Dash. They started all these other altcoins. Look at Joseph Poon of the Lightning Network. He called it quits on Bitcoin Core because they treated him so horribly, and now he's working on Ethereum stuff. There's been a horrible catastrophic brain drain on Bitcoin as well because of the toxicity of the Bitcoin Core community towards anybody who has a differing opinion. It's been so bad that they will literally delete anybody's post, right? from our Bitcoin or BitcoinTalk.org. If you're having to resort to censorship to bolster your argument, you don't have a strong argument.
This is the thing about this debate. It always, like, once you talk about all the technicals and all the other things, it always ends up in censorship, right? So maybe we should talk about censorship and what that looks like and what that means, because there's a lot of thought around that.
I'm
right?
glad to talk about censorship. Do you support censorship, or do you support the free and open exchange of ideas on public platforms for discussion of Bitcoin?
How do you differentiate between censorship and moderation of content?
So if you're running a platform called Our Bitcoin that's presented itself to the world as a place where people can discuss Bitcoin, you should allow people to discuss Bitcoin. But instead, what this person famous did, he said, no, I'm going to delete anybody's post and manipulate the entire thing. Well, it was because
people were forking the open source code base and competing in the development team, right?
Is literally centralized, so it's not a great example of a decentralized framework.
But it presents itself to the world as an open place where people can discuss Bitcoin. You mean
they're materially misrepresenting something to the marketplace? Wow, there's almost a legal term that we can describe Thamos' activities as.
Agreed.
That's on Thamos. That's not on the core developers.
To me, there's a dilemma here, right?
So Greg Maxwell has openly said that he supports the censorship policy over there. Adam Back's strongest opposition.
You call it censorship. They call it moderation. Like we haven't resolved this philosophical question, right? Like if you have something called Bitcoin and people start pumping their altcoins, is it on topic?
So calling it moderation is just a euphemism for censorship.
So this is a private company, right? So if we claim that you're censoring people on our BTC or on Bitcoin.com, you say no, it's moderation, right?
Well, no,
so
I think that
space,
the Reddit example is sort of fallacious because it's just Reddit being an issue, but the Bitcoin core developers have a Bitcoin improvement proposal process that allows you to say, I want to propose this as a framework to discuss improving Bitcoin on, and that's not egalitarian. You can't just say, assign me a random number, let me put my proposal forward, and let's discuss it. There's actual, quote-unquote, moderation on who gets to even have an approval, who gets to have a number, who gets to be listed, who gets to discuss improvement proposals.
There's moderation of BIP, Bitcoin improvement proposals.
Right.
Do you understand how that works? Like, can you explain us a little bit about how that moderation works?
When you have something become a BIP, that's when there's sort of general consensus it should get a number. But I can recall when we were having the scaling conversations, and then Gavin was like, well, I want to put a BIP for scaling, and someone else said, I want to put a BIP from scaling, and I had friends that were trying to give very constructive BIPs that they just got deleted from the wiki. And it was assign them whatever number you want. Assign them BIP 003924. Like, it doesn't need to be numerical. But it's like I think the Reddit thing is sort of is just an aspect of censorship to voice. But when it comes to censorship to even how you can discuss and engage with the developers, that comes to like protocol level censorship.
Well, I'm sorry that your friends sort of got rejected by that process. Do you know why? Like, what was the justification for them being moderated?
And I'm sorry, I wish my memory could recall back.
Yeah, because they didn't toe the party line in regards to blockchain.
Well, no, listen. If you have a house and somebody comes and you have rules and somebody comes and violates them, you can kick them out, right? So to me, like the censorship versus moderation debate is kind of too simplified, right?
But there's our Bitcoin isn't Thamos' house. It's a platform that's presented to the world as a place where people
can
come
discuss
Bitcoin.
Our Bitcoin is a Reddit forum, and I understand that there's a frustrating piece of real estate there that we can't just take over.
So
but
can I ask you,
mean, these are problems that are fundamental to society, and you can find these moderation versus censorship debates in every forum in the world, right?
So Juan, can I ask you, do you approve or disapprove of the moderation policy on our Bitcoin?
I think it's great that there's Bitcoin where people talk about Bitcoin, and there's our BTC where it's sort of more sort of like talk about whatever, and then there's our Ethereum, and like there's a marketplace. You can't claim censorship when you own Bitcoin.com, okay?
So I'm going to ask you again, Juan, do you approve or disapprove of the moderation policy on our Bitcoin?
All right, let me jump in here for a
what about it?
Was anyone else in here a moderator on our Bitcoin?
No.
Anyone else in the room?
I think Jason King sure was.
Fantastic.
Okay, so our Bitcoin had specific policies that on what a post could be and what it couldn't be. And in the middle of 2014, posts just started disappearing from the queue that were not against any of the rules that we had placed in. And then after years of being moderators, moderators just started getting booted out of our Bitcoin. And then moderators that nobody knew and that are still there today that nobody knows became the majority of the moderators that were there. I was actually removed as a moderator specifically because I deleted a post that called Roger Ver a Nazi, and that was completely against the rules that we had posted. And the response that I received back to that was, well, this seemed like it was out of character for you to defend Roger. So, which is a weird statement to make anyway. So we just assumed that your account had been hacked. So thank you for your time, but you're no longer a moderator. But that's not moderation. That's censorship of an ideal.
Which, by the way, is the same narrative that they did to Gavin. If you recall, Gavin Andreessen said, I think Craig Wright is Satoshi. And they said, well, we don't know if your keys have been compromised because you said you would turn over the keys to Satoshi. So we're going to temporarily revoke access to the your commit access.
Let's not even get into the Craig Wright thing. Because like,
continue to discuss this, we can, but it is kind of off topic from the original point. Unless we feel that.
No, this is totally on topic because this is like the heart of the debate. Like this is where people draw party lines. Is the censorship? Or this is one of the things.
So, Juan, do you approve or do you agree or disagree with the moderation policy on our Bitcoin?
I'm fascinated to learn more. So, do you tell us more about what happened? So, do you know who moderated you out or like who kicked you out?
Oh yeah, it was Thamos. Absolutely, like Thamos. Yeah, for sure. I mean,
okay.
he at least takes responsibility for doing this.
So
right.
The problem is that right now, and on this debate, I think that both of you guys characterized the debate incorrectly. Is that I think that it is not a Bitcoin versus Bitcoin Cash debate. I think that it's an innovation in the marketplace debate, and I think that there's very little argument that Bitcoin Core can make that they are now the most innovative cryptocurrency that's out there at all. And like, I think that Roger mischaracterizes a little bit because he says that we've lost all of this market share, and he blames it specifically on Bitcoin Core here. But I think a whole lot of it is actually just speculation. I think a whole lot of it are people that missed the boom. They weren't there in the beginning like us, and they really wanted to take advantage of something that was going to have an exponential amount of growth, and they didn't think that Bitcoin was going to be it. So that's why we've had this huge split. That's a big portion.
But why did they stop thinking that Bitcoin was going to be it? That's worth paying attention to too.
For sure. Well, I think there's a mental block there too, especially when the price started getting up, thinking that it can go. I mean, I personally believe that we can get to $500,000 $1 million coins. That's a mental leap for a lot of people to make when it's already, I bought this at $2. It's $1,000 now. And is it going to go to $100,000? I think it's a lot easier for people mentally to be like, cool, I'm going to reboot this. I'm going to start something that I can get in at 2 cents. And then I'm going to see that 2 cents go to $100. I think that's an easier thing. So I think that makes up for a lot of it. But in terms of the marketplace itself, and ultimately, I think that the marketplace is going to be the determiner of what wins. I don't think it's going to be an argument over on Reddit. I don't think it's going to be this show. I don't think it's going to be us talking in a corridor. I think it's that, are we providing fundamental usability to the people that we want to use this? And I think that Bitcoin Core is unusable right now. And I'm literally about to cry saying that because like I have been in this community since 2010. And for Bitcoin, something that I care so much about, to completely be passed over by so many people, and for me to have to make transactions to pay for services rendered, and I have to go to a different coin to pay for it because like a lot of times the fee that I'm paying is more or half of the transaction that I'm paying, that hurts me.
I mean, this is the bad. I understand it. And listen, a lot of people feel frustrated with the fees. I mean, I've experienced the fees, right? We all saw the fees market go up into the moon and
which
crash,
is exactly what the Bitcoin Core developers advocated and wanted.
Well, but again, let me finish. So I just sent the transaction again, Satoshi, and it's been a week of like we're at the bottom of transaction fee costs, right? Like 8 Satoshis, you can get a transaction next block.
So do you want high fees or low fees?
I'm making custom fees on my Cilium.
I can solve that in one statement. I can solve that in one statement. Okay, Betamax is fundamentally a better video codec. Okay, it is fundamentally a better way of producing video. Because VHS said, cool, we're going to make stuff that's really easy to use, and everyone's going to have one, and we're going to put we're going to put resources into creating technologies that make it easier for people. And we're going to get market distribution, and guess what? Hopefully, most of us don't have VHS anymore. But if you do have a video cassette recorder in your house, it is a VHS cassette recorder.
So user experience is
because user experience ultimately is the only thing that matters. Now, here's the thing: Bitcoin's not going to go anywhere. Okay, because Bitcoin is extremely secure, and so it's going to become this layer, and it does do this really good. It's going to become this security layer that a lot of other things are going to peg to, and it's already happening, right? But here's the deal: that's not what most of us signed up for. It's just not.
If I may, to respond to what you're saying, I'm going to sort of give a half and half argument here. So I agree with a lot of what you said, except I don't think Bitcoin is unusable. but you just said it just now. It's unusable for the most people, obviously for microtransactions and even transactions above that level. But and of course, it's all kind of relative because like Bitcoin Cash obviously can do, I mean, faster, cheaper, small transactions. But if you look at Bitcoin and compare it to, say, the legacy banking system or money transfer system, you can move a lot of money with Bitcoin cheaper and faster than you can with the legacy banking system. And because of the market cap of Bitcoin, you can move that money faster and cheaper than the legacy banking system without reducing the value of the Bitcoin, because you have a deep market and a high capitalization of Bitcoin, you have the ability to move higher funds without affecting the market price compared to, say, other coins out there. So it's kind of relative, right? So when we say extreme things like Bitcoin is unusable, technically not true.
It's not unusable. But depends who you are.
It's going to be great for people with lots of money moving it around, but obviously it's not going to be great for the rest of us.
My statement was Bitcoin is unusable for the average user.
Right.
And so, people who have lots of money already have lots of ways to move it around without using Bitcoin.
That's still not accurate, because we had 4 months of high fees. That's what happened. That's what just happened.
Which was exactly what the Bitcoin core developers wanted.
Yeah, we've talked about this multiple times already, right?
They wanted it so much that they literally said when the fees exceeded the block reward, when there were more than 12.5 Bitcoins of fees per block, Greg Maxwell literally wrote an email talking about pop the champagne. This is a huge success. It's not a huge success. It's a huge disaster for Bitcoin.
So a lot is counting on Lightning Network. We'll see how Lightning Network works. We'll see if.
So you're risking Bitcoin's entire future on an unproven technology that doesn't exist yet. That sounds like an incredibly reckless thing
last
to do.
year, Facebook lost 25 million users in the demographic of under 25. 25 million of the people that are growing up said, this is not cool anymore. I don't want to use it. Like, it's not something I'd use every day. And they've left the platform, and they are no longer active members of the Facebook community. Those people are never coming back to Facebook. The people that we lost through all of this crap, and we've been here having some version of this debate for 3 years, the people that we lost that went and they're part of Dash now, or they're part of Monero now, or they're part of the Ethereum community, and I love all those communities. And I'm just going to give a shout out to Dash, because I think Dash is the most civilized society that we have in this ecosystem. But those people that left, they're never coming back to Bitcoin Core. And it doesn't matter how good Lightning gets, or if it comes out tomorrow, or those people aren't coming back.
Well, why do you say that? I mean, you may be right, but
so I have an anecdote from that. I was talking to somebody who runs one of the Big Four advisory firms' blockchain group, and this was when the Stellar Ripple fork had happened. And at that time, they were basically the exact same code base. And I go, so could you just unpack this for me? What's going on? And this person basically said, look, at the end of the day, the Ripple guys are dicks, so we're just going to buy Stellar. And I think that, types of consensus formation that occurs is also the toxicity and the quality of the people you can engage with. I talked to Joey from Augur, and I said, why are you building Augur on top of Ethereum and not Bitcoin? And he said, because I would email Bitcoin Core, and they wouldn't even return my email. I would email Vitalik, and he would respond to me with a bug fix. And that level of engagement, that's a meta issue, it's not even a protocol issue, is a really important differentiating characteristic.
Well, let me ask you, though, is that, and that's a very valid point, but is that a characteristic of Bitcoin Core versus Vitalik, or is it a characteristic of a long-term, up until this point, successful cryptocurrency that had a huge developer team behind it, where the bigger, it's kind of like any,
I think
what I'm kind of like any bureaucracy where the bigger something gets, if Ethereum gets that big, I guarantee you it's going to be hard for someone
100%. And what you're defining is something that I try to inculcate in people's heads, which is that dynamics change at different scales. So properties, models change. You can take a model at a specific scale, get to a scale, and you go, oh, wow, this model actually needs to change. There's a new model at play. They dynamically change. And one of the things that's happening in Bitcoin is we finally got to the point where Bitcoin is large enough that one of these emergent dynamics is called culture, sectarianism. Like, we now have enough people that we have uniquely different cultural approaches to how we see and perceive things. And one of the things that I think is, like, I don't ever think you can have 3 billion people behind Bitcoin. I don't think there's a single system that has 3 billion humans behind a single inculcation of a single belief system that doesn't just fork and have different subcultures and different groups and different frameworks.
Because it gets kind of too big for its britches. And
well, it's just everyone determines a different value framework of alignment of what they want to see that particular thing be. That's why there's like 10,000 forms of Christianity, and it's like we agree on everything except this, but this is so important to me that this is going to be my community. And I think that when you talk about risk aversion in approach and execution, that the fundamental chasm of beliefs on how you interpret the world is that now Bitcoin has such a large community where the 51% attack isn't the code, it isn't the hash rate, it's the belief system of those building on top of it saying, well, we're more risk adverse and we're less risk adverse. And both are tremendously valuable perceptions to have that achieve different things that will look like different things. And that's why there's that schism that, again, the soft fork that created 2 Bitcoins. Okay, well, what did it soft fork? Well, if it didn't hard fork the code, what did it hard fork? It hard forked the community.
Interesting.
You can actually make the argument, though, that hard forking the community is actually that's the most detrimental thing. Is that because like all of these currencies, like we all succeed or die by the support of the community that supports the currency itself. And
the
those
currency
people
is the community using it.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? Shias and Sunnis love each other.
But and so that's why I come back to the fact that the people that left Bitcoin Core and they went and found something else, they went and found a home somewhere else, that's home now.
Yeah.
Like they found other people that support them, and they're still going to have, there is no one here that left Bitcoin Core that is like, you know what, F Bitcoin, I hate that crap. They don't. They love it.
I wish Bitcoin Core the most success they can possibly have. Like I have nothing but hope for their track record in the future, but I think they're on the wrong path, right? Slow, expensive, and unreliable transactions are not as useful to the masses as fast, cheap, and reliable ones. It's that simple.
Let me ask this. Let
me just respond to actually, I forgot. Go ahead.
Okay, if you remember, let me know. But let me ask a hypothetical here. Let's say Bitcoin continues to have a relatively high market cap. It sticks around. They adopt Lightning Network, and Lightning Network seems to work pretty fast. What happens between Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin Core then? What can we maybe anticipate on the market as far as market adoption? What can you argue one way or another that at this point Bitcoin Core is better or Bitcoin Cash is better? Does that make sense? Do you want to respond?
At the end of the day, Lightning Network will work better, faster, cheaper, more reliably on top of Bitcoin Cash than it will on top of Bitcoin Core. So I don't see there's that much.
Except that Lightning Network is being built with SegWit dependency, so you have to integrate SegWit or port it and build it. And where's the development talent, right? And we'll see. We'll see how.
So as I mentioned
you're talking
earlier,
about a technically trivial issue, though.
Huh?
I mean, you're talking about a technically trivial issue. That's.
And
not
as I mentioned before,
great.
Bitcoin
That's
Cash
good.
transactions are already lightning fast, so we don't even need Lightning Network. And if you go back and read the original Bitcoin wiki articles on Bitcoin.org, you can use the Internet Archive to read them from like 2011 or 2012. One of the biggest questions people had was, can this scale for the entire world to use? And they gave all the math right there. Yes, it can scale and scale on-chain for the entire world to be able to use Bitcoin.
Yeah, and now there's plenty of arguments as to why not, and you can go and read them up too, and you can go and
It's a made-up
read the
problem.
mailing list. Maybe it is, and if you're right, you'll be right, and if you're wrong, you'll be wrong, right?
Well,
But
we've
here's the
already
thing,
shown
let me
from
just-
last year to this year which one of the people that were on this debate
No,
was right.
it hasn't been shown yet. It has not been
Tone-Base was
shown
here
yet.
last year sitting at a very similar table, and he said
You're
SegWit solved
mischaracterizing.
all of our scaling problems immediately.
And
here we are a year later. That was clearly
transaction
verified by
fees
false.
are very cheap
fair
right
enough,
now,
but
right?
that is just
You're
tone-based. I mean, I'm not
mischaracterizing
saying
it,
that there aren't people who agree with him, but it is just tone-based. But what were you saying?
And
Well,
I'd
one
like
of
to
the- one
point
of the
out
things
that
that I wanted to say
Bitcoin.com
is that-
stickers are the best tape for holding up and anything else.
That's marketing.
I think we can say that what supports and keeps crypto show available to the viewer.
Yeah, I mean, one of my frustrations with this debate is that I don't think that we can blame Core as the community of people that are involved in Core for the fork or for the scaling debate or for the chaos that has happened in how to grow, right? I think that was within the libertarian movement, within the people in already, and it manifested in the economic change sort of forking, right? And this is one of the reasons that I love Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies is that at some level, as long as this thing is secure and has integrity in the accounting system and it's functional enough that there's demand it will work, then we don't need to agree on everything. We'll just have that option. If we can't agree on anything else, we can go through here, right? Because yeah, we're like, if we could all reach agreement on the perfect way to communicate with each other and engage, right? If then we wouldn't need any of this stuff, right? Like if we can all, if 95% of the population would rise consciously so that they would resist the temptations of theft and have a proper definition of theft, we wouldn't need governments, we wouldn't need blockchains, we wouldn't need security guards, we wouldn't need guns, right? So this is, the Bitcoin is a layer of consensus that it needs to be strong against the chaos of disagreement, right?
So
but
do you think Bitcoin going from 85% market share to 35% market share in 1 year, is that strong?
Well, we'll see. We'll see if it's strong enough, right?
Well, let's have the real.
It's stronger than Dash.
The real Jason King, by the way. Let's have him say something, and then I'm going to say something. Go ahead.
Okay, so and I'm going to have to abide by Chatham House rules here because that's the rules of Stogie Roundtable. But 2 years ago, we all sat down together as communities, and we're like, cool, we're going to go to this place, and we're going to go to Florida, and we're all going to sit down, and we're going to sit in a room, and we're going to hash this out because we are all a community that cares about each other. And that thing went nowhere. It was the most vitriolic thing I've ever witnessed in my life.
Satoshi Roundtable.
And at the end of the Satoshi Roundtable, when it became completely apparent that we were going to come to no consensus as to what we were going to do about block size, the proposal was made that can we just agree that we're just going to talk about technicals and that we're not going to insult each other on social media? And the two sides could not even make that agreement.
Which were the two sides?
I recall everybody agreeing to that, but then it didn't happen, and the trolling attacks got even worse.
But I also think that this gets back to what I'm trying to emphasize, which is that people aren't debating technicals; they're debating philosophy. Mm-hmm. And the problem is that if you can talk about facts for 3 hours and not change either side's position, it's not because you're debating facts; it's because you're discussing philosophy. Yeah. You don't have a framework for discussing your views because you can have the same facts but have different beliefs, and it's just understanding that different beliefs are okay. So I think that there will be a strong enough of a group of contingent of Bitcoin believers that have a distinctly different belief system that there will be another fork. Like, I love all that Blockstream is doing to pay for the construction of Mimblewimble. I do not believe for a second that Mimblewimble will ever get implemented in core because of how risk adverse they are. And I think that true anonymity and, scriptless scripting and all that Mimblewimble stuff is going to be important to a lot of what Roger Ver wants to do, to the point where maybe it will be too crazy for even cash and there'll be a third Bitcoin because those crazies are going to want that. Because at the end of the day, you can talk facts every single moment of every single day, but if you have different philosophical views, it makes all the facts irrelevant.
But the fact is that this whole market, this whole ecosystem is different. It has changed now. And the thing is that the market is done hearing us talk about it. Yeah. And a lot of people still want to hear their voices. They still want to come across it. This is it. Get in this market and build. And if you believe in it, get behind it, build it, put your support behind it, get your people behind it, support that, and get out in the market and build it. Because ultimately, the market is going to decide this. Mm-hmm. And it's not going to be decided at this table or an argument over Twitter or whatever. And then the people that believe that are going to get their whole market share stolen from underneath them, because the people that go out and actually integrate this stuff and actually build this into the community are the people that are going to win that, and that's the end of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and people, kind of like along the lines of what they're both saying, people want to. People have their preferences in the market, and when people can, they want to have their cake and eat it too. That's only possible when there's not a trade-off. I know I keep bringing this up. But so kind of like what Jonathan's saying, some people, their philosophical preference is security. Other people, it's speed and low transaction fees. But those don't necessarily have to be in trade-off with each other.
Well, we saw what the results of those two different philosophies were, because in the first 7 or 8 years of Bitcoin, the philosophy, or at least the implementation of the philosophy, were fast, cheap, reliable transactions. Bitcoin grew into a worldwide phenomenon. And then over the last year or so, we've seen the philosophy of security above all else, and that let's intentionally create slow, expensive, and unreliable transactions. And the result of that philosophy has been Bitcoin losing its market share in just last year from 85% to 35% market share.
In response to that, and this was going to be my questions anyway. Right now, this is a two-part question. Right now, which coin is more secure, Bitcoin Core or Bitcoin Cash? And is that going to be true? Is that going to be true 2 years from now? If so, or if not, why? I want to hear.
And let's define security. So, is security the amount of hash rate? Is it the amount of goodwill from the governments around the world? Like, let's define security.
Ability to verify consensus rules. Right?
Sure. There's a couple of different metrics that.
We can look at it from multiple ways, right? So obviously hashing power.
Sure.
Again, being able to verify the accounting system. Huh?
Who controls the keys for the code?
Yeah.
To Jason's point,
yeah.
Anyone can write code, but who actually have the ability to pull requests to accept?
Who has the ability
why
to
don't
pull
you say
requests?
that in the microphone?
Yeah, do it in the mic.
Here's a couple of points. Like I've been listening and getting very frustrated.
Can you identify yourself?
Yeah, so this is Bilal.
Good.
And I've been auditing Bitcoin J for almost 3.5 years. So I start looking into the Bitcoin code base just to learn and have an opinion about the whole technology. And I worked in the banking sector for 12 plus years. And I've seen some of the discussions, many of the things people are discussing over here. There's not enough discussion points. And within the banking sector, there are a lot of people who are actually working and experimenting with a lot of these technologies, but some of them may not be very public about what their opinion really are in terms of technology as well. But let's take a couple of points. Roger talked about, brain drain. So yeah, that's absolutely true. Juan, do you know who actually developed 80% of R3sev's code? That's by the way, consulting company which actually providing all the services to all the banks. 90% of the code was written by which developer?
I would guess Mike Hearn.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So Mike Hearn, before he's the one, every single Android developer is using Bitcoin J. He developed the whole scratch, and before he left, he basically ranted about the whole, and you can go read it in retrospect, you can go and read his criticism, the frustration that he had pent up. That's one. Mm-hmm. Gavin and Andresen, yeah, okay, there was some incident with regards to. Tell me what happened with Jeff Garzik. Why was his access revoked from the GitHub repository? Tell me one reason.
No reason at all.
Because I asked.
Was this right around
before
when
you,
Greg Wright came out?
before you, there's some context to this question. On the weekend when Jeff Garzik's access was revoked from the Bitcoin repository, Andreas was doing a talk where I was presenting. I asked the same question. Andreas has a much bigger audience. He has a much bigger set of people who are. He did not take a very public position about that question. Because, yeah, I understand it's a kind of a controversial question. There's a reason to this question. Because you can go and read the historical code base, and you would see it was identified that Gavin is a central point of control. He himself, while working with that, is a central point of control, and he want to give out that control to people who were around, who were credible in the ecosystem. Gregory Maxwell was one. So he was handpicked by Gavin and Andresen. Jeff Garzik was another one. And there's a whole bunch of 8 people who were there. Now comes a question, fast forward that 4 years. How are people revoking access? Same point to Jeff. You can write the code, but who has the ability to pull that code request in? Balaji Srinivasan has this thing of decentralized.com where there's basically metrics of how centralized or decentralized project is. So these are very important. So my question to you, would you like to comment about the brain drain with regards to people who are leaving the projects?
Well, to everything that you just said, I think that's fascinating, and I'm happy that you're taking a look at this and people are looking at it, right? Okay, so yes, there is a open source code base on GitHub for all of these projects, and there's people with administration rights that can pull requests in, integrate them, and not integrate them, and how they access that position of power and authority, you could say, and credibility is a complex social process, right? And I don't know that you can avoid that process. You're not going to avoid it in Bitcoin Cash. You're not going to avoid it in any other community that's using open source strategy. In Bitcoin Cash, just like in Bitcoin Core, there's going to be a bunch of people with different ideas, and they're going to have to reach some level of consensus in order to implement it into Bitcoin Cash. How do you solve that problem? That's a social problem, right? That's a human problem. But we need to, so I would say that the principle by which to...
What problems are human problems?
Yeah, so the principle through which we can audit this is transparency. We need to make sure that the mailing list is public, that the GitHub repo is public, and that people are looking at it, right? So then suppose we go back to brain drain, right? There's, I don't know what else to do, right? The price of freedom is eternal vigilance, right? So
with regards to brain drain, and this is again public knowledge, but people can go and look up. When Vitalik was working, we were both in Toronto. We saw Vitalik before Ethereum became Ethereum. We saw he was contributing code to Colored Coin project. He was contributing code, and he came to Bitcoin code. This is all public knowledge. People really need to, we talked about this morning about, there should be an IMDb of this kind of thing that you should be able to figure out instead of like hours worth of research. There should be like an IMDb of this to actually go and see who crossed who at what point. Vitalik was practically begging to get his code incorporated into Bitcoin, and the core refused. For good reasons, by the way. It's only clear in hindsight, for good reasons. Some of the things which were being suggested were extremely risky. I completely agree on that part. You can go and read that thing. Luke Jr., there are people who have beefs in this space. I've worked in technology. I worked with programmers in banking sector. I can tell you, I have seen in private industry where people come to almost fist fight. My code is better than your code. I can't let in public blockchain and open source software, you actually see this thing in a public forum. And there is no delete button for internet. There is no delete button to go and say, oh, I'm going to go and delete this thing, apart from unless you're a moderator of Reddit, right? But that information is always built.
And I don't mean for this to become a let's just tag on core. It's just core is what has existed for 8 years, But it's also as it relates to the future of Bitcoin Cash, it needs to make sure that this isn't what happens, this level of toxicity and not engineered here. And because it's a trap that everyone falls into if they're not actively maintaining it as a thing to not fall into. And the only reason it doesn't exist in cash to the extent that it doesn't exist in Bitcoin is literally simply from the fact that it's just too new for it to exist there. And maybe 8 years from now, we'll have to cache Bitcoin Cash just because it didn't solve all of the problems that Bitcoin Core didn't resolve that were people problems, not code problems.
Is that a good place to wrap it up?
Yeah.
That might be, actually.
Yeah. Well, let me say one thing. I think in general, I hope that we can agree on the principles that we're actually aiming for, the end goals, because on the means we'll have 100 tools, right?
So what are the end goals?
Well, I think it needs to be secure enough to withstand government scale attacks. It needs to have consumer grade anonymity. Right? People need to be able to have confidence that their stuff is not going to be tracked, and hopefully by default. That would be fantastic. Let's go back to sort of the early roots of Bitcoin. It's why people got in until we figured out that it wasn't quite that, right? Anonymity, right? Pseudonymity, security, and you have to be able to verify the consensus rules in the accounting system. And, from there, programmability, right? I would love it if Bitcoin Core implemented what a lot of the altcoins wanted, which is some sort of framework, as you were saying, where people can sort of build that, right? And I see that there's through SegWit and there's a lot of tools that are being built, right? Lightning networks use a very complex set of tools, even though it's relatively simple, and we'll see what spawns from that. Right?
I disagree that it's even relatively simple. It is an incredibly complex thing. Routing is no small task.
But these are difficult computing problems.
You said something really important, which is also the new altcoin forms of consensus. And sidechains, as it was proposed, was a way for people to stake their Bitcoin on an experimental version of Bitcoin that they could say, look, I know the market wants to maintain conservativeness around this, but this is an aspect that I want. I'm going to stake my money and be okay with the risks associated with this experimental framework. And I think that Bitcoin Core knew the problem, knew the solution. It's been 4 years and they're still not doing it. And I still don't see the framework for it, which is give people in Bitcoin the ability to accept the risks that they want with the code built around Bitcoin. And that's why you see all these ERC20 explosions. It's because, if something's so risky it doesn't even work in Ethereum, screw it, make it an ERC20 token and allow those people to assume those risks. And there's no way, even in Cash or in Bitcoin Core, for you to be able to experiment in that. I don't think until they do that this will be a problem that'll solve itself.
Yeah, I mean, it's a matter of priorities, right? And then Ethereum and all the ERC20 tokens, that's high iteration, less risk averse sort of environment.
And I think that there's a selection bias in this because the priorities of developers are the priorities of developers, and the priorities of non-developers can only be there on the benefits of a developer proposing it. So the market has decided that it wants things that Core said are not our priorities and has moved on from it because of it. And it's like, how do you get the non-developers' priorities ever prioritized by developers?
Well, there's options in the market.
One more point that was mentioned during the debate as well. Why do you think there was no Bitcoin Diamond, Bitcoin, anything that has come, Platinum, and why do you think that was not occurred before SegWit? Do you know the answer?
Yeah, because we crossed the line, right? That there was an opportunity to reach consensus, and we weren't ready to reach consensus. We didn't have the communication tools. Perhaps we didn't have the wisdom. Perhaps we lost to bad people.
I would like to correct that.
I'd like to point out also that actually consensus through censorship is no consensus at all, and that's exactly what we had in the community.
You own Bitcoin.com, dude. You own Bitcoin.com. You have your own forum. You have RBTC. You don't get to claim censorship anymore.
So you're saying that the moderation policy on our Bitcoin, you approve of it?
Our Bitcoin
yes or
is
no?
a Bitcoin-specific forum, and yeah, I'm sorry that they kicked you out. I'm sorry that Thymos has taken such a hardline position. What I would have loved. Let me tell you what I would have loved to see.
He has literally selectively deleted posts to make it look like the post below it was agreeing with the exact opposite thing of what he was actually agreeing with.
I mean, so I can come up with an example. I can come up with an example of censorship in RBTC, right? And we can debate this without evidence all day. Here's the thing.
There is evidence. There's screenshots and there's logs from it. Like this isn't a hypothetical. This is an absolute fact.
No, they're moderating the
I've
forum.
asked you maybe 6 or 7 times now. Do you or do you not approve of the moderation policy? I'm using your word of the moderation policy on our Bitcoin. Is it good or bad?
That's there's no way that question, you can't answer that question properly. This is the reason why people get frustrated with you,
I think it's atrocious, and the entire Bitcoin community should be ashamed of the censorship that's gone on in our Bitcoin. But that's my answer.
I think he also,
let me tell you what I think.
To make it an easier statement, when he's saying should, I don't think he's using a descriptive should. I think he's using a moral should.
Okay.
Do you find it morally good, morally neutral, or morally bad?
Right.
Here's
the
what I think.
Activities that are occurring in the moderation of Bitcoin.
Here's what I think Thymos should have done. It was a big fuck up.
Do you think it's morally good or morally bad?
Let me answer the question. So what Thymos should have done, instead of saying, okay, altcoins are bad and not Bitcoin, and if we're going to talk about Bitcoin, let's talk about Bitcoin, he should have created a third category called Bitcoin scaling debate and just let people go. And maybe that would have worked.
Juan,
right?
Were you a member of our Bitcoin in 2012, 2013?
I entered into 2014. I entered in 2014.
Yeah. How many people here were in our Bitcoin in 2013?
Like half the room for those that can't see.
Do you guys remember how amazing that community was?
It was wonderful.
Do you remember like getting up in the morning and being like, man, I cannot wait to get on there.
Wonderful things are happening today.
It's going to be it was going to be incredible. And like all the stuff that's still here, like the Bitcoin Wizard and HODL, all that stuff, that's all our Bitcoin. That's all back in the day. Right. Exactly. That all came from there. And then that community that we built got eroded into one of the most vitriolic, terrible places that exist on the internet. And unfortunately, because they use the word Bitcoin, the people that come to the community for the first time, it ranks high enough in Google search results. They go there and they think that that's Bitcoin, and it's a travesty, man. And it is, and like we can sit here and make arguments over it, but like that community doesn't exist. And I've recently refound it again because I've actually gotten some great Telegram groups. Like Telegram has become this new place for us to get in and have these conversations. But it was our Bitcoin, and it's not our Bitcoin anymore. And like I said about the people that left Bitcoin, like the people that left the good community, they're never going back there. Like that's just going to get worse.
I used to think Andreas was crazy when he said, "I'm just not going to go to our Bitcoin." And I was thinking, "Oh my God, how are you going to lose out on so much information?" And it's literally been maybe 3 or 2 years since I've even looked at our Bitcoin, and I don't think I've missed anything.
I mean,
because it's the amount of stuff that they don't have there is almost more important than the amount of stuff that they do. And I feel like I need to source information elsewhere. And he actually had something interesting to say about Bitcoin forks, which gets back to priorities of users versus priorities of developers.
We actually go to our Bitcoin so that we can post Roger Ver videos and get death threats.
Yeah. Okay, just to give you one, I disagree with Jason or just people who hold this opinion that, people who are gone, they're never going to come back. Government, we undermine. I've sat down through some of these conversations, and what I can't say publicly, obviously, because I still have NDAs which are effective for me.
We got a narc in the room.
Okay. Okay. What? So yeah, just in terms of people who have all it would take a bunch of subpoenas to go out, and then people would start to realize, oh my goodness, I need to get out of X, whatever that X is. And then they would look for other places which would have some of the characteristics that Bitcoin does and offer. There's a reason Satoshi doesn't want to come forward. There's a reason. So there's some legal implication which are not yet well understood. And, every single government agency have 7 years. if not more, before they would start to enforce some of these. And they are very careful about it. They're very methodical about it as well, but they're very understaffed as well. That's why you don't see so many things happening so quickly as well. So there's a whole bunch of context to this, and people would have perspective, you know, when people would like to come back, and I want to be responsible in terms of what I say or what I don't say. But in terms of that, there are people who have conversations all the time. And when that thing comes, whatever that is, in terms of that, people would have would look for places to go back to, or okay, which is a more. That's why integrity of how private your implementation is. You know, somebody takes idea and do a bad implementation of project. Doesn't have to do anything with the bad idea, with the idea which was pretty good. It's the implementation you have to look at, which project is implementing. That's why, you know, there are projects which are very private about when they are implementing or making a claim, oh, this is a more private blockchain. You know, that is very hard. So those are conversations which are yet to occur.
Yeah, but you were talking about UASF being the...
Yeah.
Can
Okay.
I just make a quick comment before we move on to another topic? So just to finish off this forum problem, right? Like real estate, like branding real estate exists, right? So our Bitcoin, Bitcoin.com, Bitcoin.org, they exist, and they're scarce, and there's 3, okay? And there's some people on one side that are very frustrated, like you, very frustrated, and you guys, very frustrated with the way that Reddit has changed and the way that the moderation has happened. There's people on the other side very, very frustrated with the way that you're using Bitcoin.com, okay? So this is a problem that it doesn't really, we don't really necessarily have a solution.
With Bitcoin.com?
Well, you're using Bitcoin.com to promote Bitcoin Cash as if it's the true Bitcoin, and people that are newcomers, according to you, right? But it's a different code base. It's arguably less secure. It's got a different development team, different development strategy. It's a different thing.
Well, to be fair, you could argue it is sort of a subjective thing in the sense of, well, yes, Bitcoin Core is the original Bitcoin.
There's multiple different characteristics, and maybe Bitcoin Cash has like 5 of them, and Bitcoin Core has 4 of them, and you can argue as to which has more of the characteristics.
Right. I mean, so it's a little bit of
it's not clear cut.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying.
But Satoshi handed off control of Bitcoin Talk to Thamos for the good of the community, and then on Bitcoin Talk, we decided that we were going to have a Reddit channel, and that became our Bitcoin. That was part of our community. That was a community resource that has now been privately co-opted and is being manipulated by one person and whoever his sycophants are that run that. Bitcoin.com is a privately owned entity by a person that bought that and runs it how he sees fit. And especially at this conference, I think that we should all support that.
Not only that, but didn't Thamos get like 8,000 Bitcoin that he's never spent to upgrade Bitcoin Talk? Was it, what, 14,000? Wasn't the entire point? He said, hey guys, community, I got the hand of God offering me this stuff. He said, I'm going to be his light bearer. Let's fundraise. Got 14,000 Bitcoin. Was going to update Bitcoin Talk to an entirely new web forum system. Have this, like, all of the community discussions, all the decentralized notions would be there. And people were offering. They'd say, oh, I'll do it for 20 grand when he had $250,000. He's like, no, we're working on it. Oh, when he has 2 million. Oh, we're working on it. I'm not like conspiratorial. I'm just like, where the hell is that money? Yeah. He never updated it. What's going on? Like, it's like how many hundreds of millions of dollars that man had saying we're the community, and like that to me is like we should be asking for that money back.
I would love for Thamos to engage the community and explain his
why he has 14,000 Bitcoin. He never has to justify.
Yeah. So I'm not going to defend him any more than I've already sort of defended the topic in general. And if I've defended him, I will not do it anymore because he has had a pivotal influence in the Bitcoin community because of the position of trust that he got from Satoshi or whoever. I don't know if it was Satoshi or the community that gave them that sort of administration power. And he is definitely a powerhouse in as far as the communication of Bitcoin, right? So what are the solutions? I would love to have Thamos come on the show and tell us what the hell has been going on, because people have a lot of questions and he's been demonized, and people have good reasons to demonize him, right? I don't know what else.
So Roger, one question. Bitcoin Cash just had a hard fork, correct? Juan, do you remember there was a time in 2015, there was a BitFury conference, and there was a debate between Adam Back and Gavin Andreessen and the guy from Marshall Long. It's a very specific question. People can go look up on YouTube on that part. And the question was, it was a hard-headed question around whether SegBit should be a hard fork end or a soft fork end. Okay? Now, retrospect. It was debated by Adam Back very clearly in that point, which was hard fork, bad idea. It's a very big network. We cannot do it. And honest to God, I did not knew the answer. I was like very curious, okay? And Adam Back was a much more credible person to listen to, at least in terms of, but from software perspective, I did not knew, or none of the people knew the answer. So this comes back to the conservative approach versus a more agile approach. And already, Bitcoin Cash has had a hard fork already. Okay, there are some giveaways to this, which is it is still fairly new, low hash rate, less number of people, so less a relatively easy transition. But to say that, oh, it's not even possible, that was the position being taken over there back then. The hindsight is that you can actually figure out and learn and change your opinion about it. Many people would build credibility in this ecosystem by saying, hey, I was wrong. I thought of this, but I actually have changed my mind based on the science that is available. There are example after people who thought of something one way, saw the science, and then said, perhaps I need to learn something. I need to learn some humility. Not one time I have seen anywhere in core where people have actually said, we did something wrong, or we have learned something new. That's kind of sort of missing right now. Very disappointing.
That's also most of Ethereum too. I mean, I actually greatly disagree that the market rewards people who admits they're wrong. Well, it's like, no, the greater you get to be entirely full of shit and full of yourself and think you're the greatest thing since sliced bread and you're some cherub down from heaven because you're perpetually a 19-year-old boy genius, is like to the extent to which this market gives you billions of dollars. I very strongly disagree with admitting you're wrong to make money.
Real quick, I just want to make the point that I want to commend Juan, because this has turned into a little bit of a gang up on him, I feel, because it seems like one side is a bit overrepresented, and that was, sometimes that just happens.
There's more time to talk about, so I'm sure with time I'm going to hate Bitcoin Cash very passionately.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. I mean, I'm taking this position because I'm in a position to take it, and I think it's important to bring nuance to this discussion because it is a nuanced problem. I think I resist demonizing people, and I resist idealizing people, and when I demonize somebody, I make sure I have really fucking good reasons for it.
So, are you willing to morally condemn the moderation policy on our Bitcoin?
I would like to hear Thamos engage and explain his thinking. And if we, after that, if I hear that, right, and I've done some reading and I've read some of the arguments of why he did what he did back in the day when he started banning people that were forking the code base, and it's complex. It's not what you're representing. I'll tell you that much.
Let me ask you, based on what you're saying, are you saying that in your mind,
it could be justified somehow?
If based on information you've seen, it could be justified, but you're not sure. You need more information.
Well,
Is that kind of what you're saying?
We need to define censorship and moderation and figure out which one it is. Right?
It's gone to the point where he literally deletes posts selectively, so the posts below it look like they're agreeing with the exact opposite thing of what they're agreeing. So there's a fantastic post by John Block called "Our Bitcoin Censorship" or something like that. If you haven't read it, go read it. If any thinking person, their jaw should drop and just be stunned by the amount of manipulation and censorship and just absolutely horrible things that have gone on our Bitcoin to manipulate the entire Bitcoin ecosystem as a whole.
What do you make of that, Jason?
I was an Our Bitcoin apologist for a long time because I was there when a lot of this stuff was happening, and I was behind the scenes, and there were a lot of good moderators that were there that were making impassioned arguments, and then their argument just wasn't getting held. But it used to at least feel like we had a forum where we could we could put our opinions out there as moderators, and sometimes we'd lose. And that's what happens when you're in a debate. You don't win everything. That stopped. It started being a dictatorship in terms of like what was getting up and what was getting and what wasn't being up. And then
just to talk about the debate. I was trying to have a debate on the forum before we ever had Bitcoin Cash. I've been following it since Bitcoin Classic, Bitcoin Unlimited. It's been a long-term debate. And before, you could actually talk about it on YouTube and then express those ideas, put them up on a forum and have people debate or talk about it, at least create a discussion. I got banned from from the Bitcoin Reddit for just putting up a video that was saying, I feel Bitcoin Cash more aligns with the ideals of the white paper for this reason. Put it up, got kicked out. Never got discussed. So, I mean, we have censorship on so many different levels. That even affects YouTube.
Okay, well, this is fair enough. Fair enough. 1 second, and I'll let this gentleman speak in a second too. But I'm going to just ask this out there. Is there anyone who can, I don't want to say take Juan Galt's position, but is there anyone who maybe has a differing opinion about the censorship issue with Reddit who wants to make a statement or ask a question?
Does anybody want to support the censorship?
I'm just doing
right up.
I'm just doing this out of fairness. So I'm giving someone the opportunity to do that. If there is someone in the room who wants to take another position on it. Anyone?
This also isn't a pro-Bitcoin. This also no, but this also isn't a pro-Bitcoin Cash discussion at this point. It's just this is a problem. Like what I was saying before is like.
Well, I'm not saying it's a pro-Bitcoin Cash. I'm just saying, does anyone have a different position?
Right. No, but what I'm
whether
just
this is actual censorship.
What I'm just trying to identify, because I'm really trying not to gang up on Juan, is that groups identify belief systems that they have and things they're not willing to compromise on. And what's happening is that there's a group of Bitcoiners that are saying, here's something that's occurring in Bitcoin that I'm not saying what the solution is, but is a line in the sand that I'm not going to cross when it comes to an activity that I'm seeing happening in Bitcoin.
Yeah,
and that's not to say that means that discussion is pro-Bitcoin Cash as a conclusion, but that here's a line in the sand as it relates to a feature of Bitcoin that we don't want to be a part of.
Sure, that's a fair clarification, but I mean, I already understand that.
This is a fascinating conversation.
Oh, yeah, let's post this on our Bitcoin. I'm sure it'll be deleted.
Great. Yeah, maybe. We'll see. And that will be a testament to where it's at. So let me
can I see by show of hands who here has had their post deleted on our Bitcoin? Right? Is there anybody? Yeah. So that's like more than half the room put their hand up here.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a discussion about multiple things, right? Free speech, as far as the freedom to engage in debate, civility, the freedom to engage in debate without being distracted out of the room, right? And where to have these discussions, the proper spaces to have these discussions, right? And these are social problems that are so large that there's a civil war brewing in the United States because those problems have not been resolved, right? You have Facebook censorship, you have YouTube censorship of political ideas, and Google is censoring. The only way that we can achieve free speech today is in the internet, and in the internet, like with your own website, and it's because we can hang our shingle and anybody can go to us, and there's no middleman. It's peer-to-peer, right? And even then, Google has had enough power to remove certain domain names so that you can't get to a website and have to move somewhere else. But in some extreme cases, right? So the question is, when libertarians think about property rights and etiquette rules, right? They say it's my house, my rules, and whatever, right? Well, I think free speech and civility they transcend, like as principles, they transcend private to public property. But you still have the right to do whatever you want. However, you're still violating that principle of free speech if you violate it. So I would say that
like rules of civility kind of thing. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Well, so you own your house. Yeah, you have the right to kick anybody out. But if you kick somebody out because they said something nice that you didn't like, you're still violating the principle of civility.
Right, was that the right thing to do?
Even though it's your house, right? Yeah. And so there's clearly very strong argument to say that our Bitcoin and Thymus and Bitcoin Talk have violated the principles of free speech, right? And then I would love to have them come and defend themselves, because free speech, I think, is fundamental to the prevention of conflict and to the resolution of conflict.
Does it bother you at all that most of the people that have been supporting the censorship or engaging in it are anonymous figures? We don't know their real names, and they're hiding behind their cloak of anonymity on the internet, whereas all the people advocating for free speech are very public figures using their real names, or the vast majority of them are anyhow?
Well, I don't know that characterization is true, and I like that there's anonymity, because anonymity is freedom of speech. If you look at things like 4chan, where there's great kinds of trolling and horrible things, there's also incredibly pure conversations there, and it's because it is an anonymous forum. And that's one of the great things about Bitcoin, is that it's anonymous. You can do anonymous. But yeah, you have to defend yourself on the merits of the content if you're dealing with somebody that doesn't have reputation.
But to be fair, according to your own principles, like, yes, they have the right to be anonymous, but I would say even according to your own principles, if they're going to especially say very inflammatory things or whatever, they should go ahead and out themselves, because it's sort of it lacks courage, if anything, to be anonymous, and it's more honest and transparent.
So Joey over here just submitted the link to this video.
To the live stream?
To the live stream. It was deleted within 45 seconds.
Wow. Right on.
It's gone.
So what do you think about that, Juan?
So, Juan,
I feel at this point.
Can I just want to recharacterize this one thing. So
there's a problem.
Temos absolutely has the right to. I mean, he's the moderator. He's following Reddit's rules he can absolutely do that.
Well, he's not even following Reddit's rules either, if you read that. Unfortunately, Reddit hasn't stepped in, but if you read the the policy guidelines for moderating a sub Reddit, he's completely violating that as well.
I haven't read the TOS fully, so I will agree with that. But just even if he was, right, do you think that what has happened on our Bitcoin has been good for the cryptocurrency ecosystem as a whole, or has been bad for the cryptocurrency ecosystem as a whole?
Yeah.
Just that one thing, and it's a yes or no answer. Do you think that has been a positive or a negative effect for our ecosystem?
I think that there's better options there's better decisions he could have made, probably. But I've never administered a forum with hundreds of thousands of people.
It sounds like you're not willing to take a firm opinion.
See, the problem that I have with you is you're not listening to what I'm saying. So, like, yeah, there's two choices that were framed here. You know, let people do whatever they want and moderate based on topic, right? I think that a third category would have been a proper solution or potentially a proper solution. But yeah, I think that where we're at today is not in a community that has a proper space, perhaps, to have these conversations, right? Maybe there are some spaces, right? And we need it, and we need better communication. We need a place where we can have these discussions. So yeah, the results have been
suboptimal,
negative.
Yeah. And you're making informed defenses, and I really appreciate you being here. And like I don't really have a dog in this fight here. You know, I'm fairly blockchain agnostic myself, but I am galvanized on our Bitcoin thing. But you know, you're here and you're defending Thamos. And on Thamos's forum right now, the video of you defending Thamos is getting
the irony. I'm not defending Thamos. Let me just step in here, because here's the thing. You basically just answered his yes or no question.
Yeah.
You basically were saying it was suboptimal, and then you used the word negative, so you answered his question. Yeah. And that was the crux.
I believe what he meant is that it's double plus on good, Chris.
Sorry. My news speak's a little rusty.
All right, but if you want to clear...
No, but so what I'm saying is we're kind of going in circles at this point. We've had a lot of credible testimony about how our Bitcoin operates. We've had apparent objective evidence just now about how our Bitcoin operates. You've answered his question that kind of sums up the debate.
Yeah, I think that they're violating the principle of free speech, but I don't know what the solutions to make
that transaction time on our Bitcoin is faster than Bitcoin.
So what I'm saying is, I feel like we're just at this point running in circles. We've already thrown out a lot of arguments and evidence.
It's been a great conversation, I think.
I think so. I mean, and again, I do regret that that it's been several people kind of against you. I think you've held your own quite well. But
I enjoyed it.
I think everyone's done a good job. We've kept it relatively civil and friendly, and I hope everyone more or less thinks so. And whether or not that's true, let's try to be friends. That's what it's all about. Let's not,
we're all friends.
You know, I know. I'm just saying because.
Could I just ask him, like,
into the mic?
Hi, Mike from Bitcoin.com. I don't expect you to speak for Thamos. That's not fair to ask you to do that. But how do you feel spending 2 or 3 hours of your time, 6, however many years of your time, up here talking about it, and no one can read or learn about it in our Bitcoin? Because we just tried.
Yeah, I think
so.
It's unfair.
Personally, like, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think it's unfair. I mean, 45-second reaction is probably a bot, right? So they have some rules built in. It's a tyranny of information moderation.
And that may be a fair point. I mean, I'm not saying that they maybe not unfairly like programming their algorithms, but that is.
I mean, it's still a problem. It doesn't.
It is also like
still a problem. Yeah.
There are very distinct interests at play in Bitcoin talk, and they want their narrative to work. So I remember in the early days of Ethereum, we would post an Ethereum post, and only if it were negative to Ethereum would it be left up on our Bitcoin. And if it were anything even tangentially positive about Ethereum, immediately deleted.
Okay. Same with Bitcoin Cash today, and same with posts about me. If it's negative, it's allowed. But you say Roger's a nice guy, delete it.
So it's not even that like we have a policy. It's that when it is positive towards my perception of what Ethereum, what Bitcoin is, it's okay. But when it's negative, like it isn't a policy. It's not even policy.
There's a good chance what you're saying is true, but you're still technically projecting. From
somebody repost that link on Reddit saying Roger's being destroyed and see how long it stays.
Yeah.
Well,
4 on 5, Roger destroyed. Yeah.
Well, maybe we need to.
No, someone repost it right now. Roger finally admits it's called Bcash. See if it stays up. The exact same talk.
Well, and you know what? The whole our Bitcoin thing speaks to a broader point too of people villainizing other people for disagreeing, and and I'm not saying that, like, I mean, obviously our Bitcoin behavior, I don't know much about it actually myself personally, but it sounds from all the testimony pretty bad. But again, it just reminds us.
Anonymity gives you a culture like 4chan. I mean, mic drop. Like, come on.
Yeah,
like, that's what we have.
And that's, I mean, yeah, and that's kind of the.
I think the part that's so frustrating for me and Jason is we remember it was such a wonderful, happy, exciting community. And every day when we'd wake up in the morning, that'd be the first place you'd check to see what exciting, wonderful things are happening in the ecosystem today.
There's not a community that changed my life more than that community. When it was good, the friends that I met that I still have today, the relationships that I formed, the business relationships that I formed, they came from that community. Like, that used to be like this bastion of hope in all of the vitriol.
And then the censorship started and it turned into 4chan.
And I think it's also, there was like a really important meme that I loved, which was Bitcoin users not affected. And it was literally posting stuff that had nothing to do with Bitcoin, except for the fact that it had nothing to do with Bitcoin. That was the entire point. It was Bitcoin users unaffected. My favorite post ever posted to Bitcoin was autism, Bitcoin users affected. But like it just the level of codifying, like, this is allowed, this isn't allowed. Yeah. What, this is about banking and it doesn't affect Bitcoiners? Well, now you can't even put a Bitcoin users not affected poster about it. Like, you like they're saying that level of essence of frivolity, like that's gone.
Yeah, that's a violation of free speech, I think. And yeah, okay, so there's some gray zones where, you know, people are making threats or whatever that you should definitely, you know,
well, it's just like, I think what I'm trying to express is that, like, Doge literally commoditized this. The entire community was just, let's just have fun and not care about anything else. Mm-hmm. And like that was an entire market cap on the basis of just like what our Bitcoin used to be.
Yeah,
and I would just in line with the sort of show, and I have zero proof of this, right? But hypothetically, if you saw that a movement was gaining traction and it was a threat and that everyone was getting along, and then even when they had a debate, they would have a debate, but they would handle it themselves, and you would do it in a positive environment where everybody can talk openly, what better way to shut that community down than to fractionalize it, to censorship it, and to divide that community against each other?
Yeah, if you wanted to destroy Bitcoin, you couldn't have been more effective than what's happened in the last couple of years. You've shattered the community into 1,000 different subgroups. You've imposed censorship. Like, if you wanted to destroy it, you couldn't have been more successful than what's been accomplished over the last year or two.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe that's just where we're at, right? Like, maybe that's just the psychology of people today, right? Like, there is, like, as we were saying, you know, there's chaos in the freedom, right? So you fork the Bible and then you have 10,000 interpretations, right? Like, that's what happens to some degree, right? So the question is, how do we engage? How do we reach consensus, and where do we reach consensus? And maybe we need to start reframing and rethinking and rebranding Bitcoin, our Bitcoin and Bitcoin.talk as Bitcoin promotion environments, right? They're not the truth about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency environments. They're Bitcoin promotion environments. Perhaps that's what they are, right? And that's fine. And the conversations maybe are happening now at conferences, and maybe they're happening in Telegram. Maybe we need to have another option, right? I don't know. Like, obviously you've created one, and I commend you for building your space and trying to do the best that you can to foster what you're looking for. I think that's great. Right? I don't know what the moderation policies of Bitcoin.com's forum are. I don't know.
You can go over there and see, and there's plenty of people over there saying Bcash and Roger's a bad guy and this and that, but we let them say what they want to say.
And that takes courage. That takes that there's integrity in that, right? So I respect that. We would love to first to have a solution to this problem, but it needs to be nuanced, right? Like, if we just like, they've been taken over and bad, right? And then we don't get anywhere anyways.
But like, here's the thing. I mean, go ahead and see what you're going to say, but let's maybe try to wrap this up, because I feel like we're belaboring the point. Yeah. But there's been a lot of good things or valid arguments and evidence and stuff that's been said. I think kind of people get the sense for what is going on in our Bitcoin. So either let's wrap it up pretty soon in the next 5 minutes, or if there's other topics related to what we've been talking about to address, we can do that too to wrap it up. So.
Well, I was just going to say that this comes down to when we were discussing, and you said, well, that's a people problem. And I think that like when you don't address people problems, you get schisms. And I think that the definition of a people problem is that, I wish that there could just be an Excel sheet with all of the core contributors to Bitcoin Core that self-identify as such, to say, was SegWit a hard fork or a soft fork? And like that alone will just like, if we could just get a running tally of that, will tell you the difference between the understandings of what fully encapsulates Bitcoin as a community. Because it's so funny that we're talking about like, you know, $100 billion project forking into like 7 different projects, and what we're talking about is a subreddit, not anything to do with the code.
Social consensus is important.
Right, and I actually think that something that I find scary, and I hope to God won't happen, but I have a feeling is that emergent consensus on the ability to change what the laws of that world is called. When you have 300 million people, those are called congressmen, right?
Oh, yeah.
So everyone's like, well, why? You know, if only we can get rid of the politics, people could let me make the changes to the Constitution that I see fit. And it's like, I functionally think that when Bitcoin has 300 million users, core developers are going to be exactly like the legal people who contribute code to that.
Well,
and they're all going to be politicians.
Yeah, let's add another principle to the ones we mentioned before, scarce supply, right? Let's just not move that line. And I know there's people that are talking about why you should move that line. I haven't really heard the argument pro moving it, but that's going to be the next, one of the bigger sort of battlefronts, assuming that privacy gets some degree solved by Lightning Network and onion routing, maybe other technology. The next battle is going to be the total supply, like the scarce supply.
I think that fungibility is a far greater argument than people give it credit, because I don't think Coinbase will ever allow a Mimblewimble-based Bitcoin to ever be transacted in their network. They close accounts after you withdrawn your money because of all the basis of what they do weeks after you withdrawn it. Like the level of ability that Coinbase is able to have with regulators because of the total lack of anonymity in Bitcoin is something that, like, I think that when we actually have Bitcoin have anonymity, you will realize that you have enemies you never realized you had.
And a large part of the reason why we don't have any anonymity on Bitcoin right now is because of the full blocks. It stripped away people's ability to use these privacy tools because it made them too expensive to use.
I don't get that argument.
All the Bitcoin mixers became too expensive for people to use.
The transaction fees, right? Well, we're back to 8 Satoshis, so, right? But we'll see if it works, right? In Lightning Network, again, Lightning Network has...
Remember, the core development team openly say that they want the fees to be high, the transactions to be slow and unreliable due to the full blocks. That's their intentional design.
You're going to be able to open one channel and move through a lot of different networks through that. So anyway, we'll see how Lightning Network works. And
one last question. I'm sorry, I believe it's
another
Michael.
Old school Bitcoiner, Rasa.
I believe it's Michael.
Sorry, yeah, Michael Rasa. Sorry, I didn't hear anybody say this, but the argument was between centralization and decentralization. I'm sure somebody brought up something at Satoshi Roundtable I never thought of before, which is that if transaction fees are high, as a miner, you need to be a bigger miner in order to have the transaction fee be a smaller portion of your transaction to move the money out to actually get paid. So in a sense, higher transaction fees will also centralize mining.
Big time, and we saw that on our pool. A bunch of miners switched from mining Bitcoin Core to mining Bitcoin Cash because they could actually afford to withdraw their funds each day that they were mining. Whereas on Bitcoin Core, if the withdrawal fee is $50, well, heck, they're going to have to mine months before they could even afford to withdraw their coins.
There's a variety of technologies. I mean, can't you do transaction batching in reverse? So you have a bunch of inputs, right, to one output, pay one transaction.
You can, but more expensive is more expensive than less expensive. And the full blocks make all transactions, regardless of batching or whatever else, it makes them more expensive.
One of the things that happened, as far as my understanding goes, is SegWit is going to allow sort of modifications or sort of new tools to come in, right? And so again, we'll see, right? We'll see how things go.
Bitcoin already worked incredibly well, and then it was intentionally broken.
Well,
and then the core team came and said, "Look, we have all these tools to fix the problems that we caused." That's where we're at today.
Well, we have people have Bitcoin Cash, so we'll see where the market goes. Yeah,
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, Juan.
Yeah.
I want to thank Juan specifically. Juan set all this up, so thank you very much for the invitation, Juan, and thank you for participating.
Well, and I want to thank everybody. Definitely Juan. Appreciate it, man. And great job, especially considering it was one against many. Want to thank Roger Ver, as always. Much appreciated that you involved yourself. And, of course, I want to thank Dima, Rasa, Michael.
I'm sorry I jumped in, but, I mean, I just want to commend John for like, taking all you guys on. I was just sitting there, and it was just like,
amen.
Pile on.
Well said.
It's usually the other way around.
Gotta keep going. You have to turn Super Saiyan or something.
I also want to thank who I'm still pretty sure is the real Jason King for being a part of this. You had a lot of great things to ask and say. I appreciate it, man.
We had him on yesterday.
It's Tim. Sorry, Tim. And, actually, and Jonathan Mohan, of course, for moderating and everything else.
I
And
was a little less partial than a moderator.
right.
Yeah.
And you know what? I kind of feel bad. You were kind of waiting in line for a question. I hate to extend this, but do you feel your question is still relevant? You want to ask it, or?
Sorry, I don't have a question right now.
Oh, okay. I thought you were sitting and waiting in line. Okay, gotcha.
He's just hanging out.
Talk to Jonathan Mohan.
What Roger Ver said there about the core developers actively saying that they want transactions to be slow and expensive and for Bitcoin to be unreliable. I don't think that's the case. I think
it is in their own words, and I put together a whole slide deck with their exact quotes saying that they want it
It's a
as much.
mischaracterization.
And you can find it at rogerver.com
They're
on the
saying that
slideshows.
they want to move the vast majority of the volume to layer 2 so that they can have cheap transactions and security.
Cheap transactions on layer 2, meaning that transactions on the Bitcoin base layer are slow, expensive, and unreliable.
Yeah, but
and
you
I
can
used to be a
move
big
very
core
fast.
supporter myself. You can find videos on YouTube of me from a couple of years ago saying we're so lucky to have the core team and Adam Back and Greg Maxwell, and it wasn't until I realized, oh my God, they want Bitcoin transactions to be slow, expensive, and unreliable, that I was no longer a core supporter, and I broke rank and then got a lot of hate from the community. But I'm not here to be popular. I'm here to speak the truth, and that's why I got involved in Bitcoin from day one, telling people
To be
this
able
is
to
amazing.
selectively edit, in the words of Thamos, Roger Ver, I'm not here to be liked. I think we can just, we don't even need the second part.
That could be the title.
Yeah, that could be the title. That's the whole show. You don't need to know anything else.
All right, well, let's wrap this up. It's been great, guys. Thank everybody. Thank the audience. A pretty good turnout, and the audience has been interactive too, helping us determine aspects of the debate.
It wasn't 1v1. It was 1v100.
Exactly. And way to be a Spartan. Way to be a 300 there.
Although I wonder if
against
that's
the Persian horde around you.
I wonder if that's a representation for how much people like core versus cash at this point. Because we only found one guy.
Well, that's an empirical question. This is not the biggest sampling size, so I don't know. But,
there's also a major difference between disliking something in Bitcoin and actively supporting cash. Those are two different positions.
That's an excellent point, too. Well, this has been the Crypto Show. I hope everyone's enjoyed it, and I hope to have another debate like this again.
Maybe tomorrow. We'll see.
Let's do it. Let's find something else to debate, like whether...
Oh, no.
I don't know, but I actually think, do you think that Bitcoin can have fungibility and anonymity in it? Because I think that we're going to have far more enemies from people that we think are friends when we finally pull the trigger on that. I think that's going to be a big...
We've already seen that with, what's the Russian mining group? Bitfury, right? So they opposed all this scaling stuff on chain, and then just a couple weeks ago they announced their BitPrism or something thing that's basically a spy tool that they're selling to governments. And it's much, much easier to spy on what people are doing with their Bitcoins if you limit the size of the block so that there's a smaller haystack to search for that needle in.
I think that when you look at lines that you draw in the sand, that this block size debate, sand line drawing, that all of the people who support Bitcoin and all of the people who support Bitcoin Cash that want to see fungibility and anonymity will find that people in each of their camps that they thought were friends are actually a common enemy. So in the
or it might go the reverse. So Greg Maxwell claims he wants privacy, and I'm fully on board with that. The more
but that's
private
what I'm saying.
Bitcoin
Is we have so many more friends that we realize because we've been fighting about one topic, we've not been fighting about the others. To realize that,
maybe I'm going to team up with Bitcoin Core to bring more anonymity to Bitcoin. Count me in on that.
Like
I'm fully on board.
And I think that a conversation about how we as a community can talk about anonymity in Bitcoin and where the threats and opposition to that may be could be a far more constructive conversation.
I was going to say, and more of a conversation, because it sounds less like a debate than a conversation. So that would be maybe something we could do tomorrow. Or we could do whether Satoshi Roundtable wants to adopt this as their logo. That could be another discussion. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, I think that's great. We'll talk about that. Maybe we'll have a discussion tomorrow. We'll see. All right. Well, I see we wrap it up. It's been fun, and this has been the Crypto Show. Later, guys.